but FaZe can still have that moment. It's basically like kicking a hornet's nest and then throwing it onto the A side. That's FaZe Clan on the execute.
He actually agreed to do a comprehensive interview to tell other players what it actually did to his career and how it really destroyed any aspiration he could ever have.
You're keeping us up to date, Ryan, as you know, you've had to watch two things at once here and take notes.
I'll do a cosplay of Europe VCT so far. Hold on.
Okay. Quite the week it's been in the Valorant world, ladies and gentlemen. Someone dropped some upsetty spaghetti in North America. Europe was crickets, and we'll talk a little bit about match fixing. I am Uber. I'm here with Ventilian. Ryan Central rejoins us for another week. Great to have you back, man. And tons to talk about this week, guys. But first of all, we made it through the April Fool's shitfest of crappy bait posts on Twitter.
I love it, man. I love April Fool's jokes. I actually am surprised I didn't do anyone this year. Yeah, I didn't.
Well, what would you? Is that your kind of thing? Are you an April Fool's joker, Vans?
I'm just a joker in general. I mean, this just.
You're a fucking clown.
Exactly. I'm a clown. This falls straight onto my plate. This is a shit I love. So I'm surprised I didn't do anything this year with it.
What about you, Ryan? No pranking? Huh?
No, not really. I think the worst thing as a European is you go, because it's meant to be before midday, right? So of course we go for the European shit April Fools, and then North America wakes up and they're like, you know what, we're gonna crack some shit out. And oh god, like, not second April Fools.
Ryan doesn't want to talk about it, but you know, he gets an email in his inbox like invitation to cast VCT challenges.
Yeah, he made sure he checked the date on that one.
Yeah, it's just like Coconut Mall or something. Yeah.
All right, so I mean, yeah, we obviously. I just try and avoid Twitter, especially because people do it after midday as well. I think like the whole like before midday rules kind of phased out in esports. I think we had that rule in a world where like we had work days and we didn't want to fuck the entire work day up with this shit. But yeah, esports never really sleeps. So sometimes it doesn't ever really wake up either. Still, some orgs did some fun things on April Fool's. Riot obviously was involved in some April Fool's shenanigans. Agents of Romance. Yeah, I mean this one. Low-key, I might have played this one. I don't know.
I always wanted to try that. Is it Doki Doki or whatever? And you're like a pigeon.
Yeah, it's
and
the Toki Doki Literature Club.
Yeah, and it's like pigeons. I was watching people play it, and I was like, I've never like watched it more than like 5 minutes, but it's interesting. And I'm like, yo, this.
I was gonna say you should.
I think you're mixing two of them up.
I should.
Yeah, if you want to, if you really want to know what that game is like, you should watch it to the end or play it to the end. Yep.
Is it TOS? Is it okay to like stream it until the end?
It's not Monka. It's not Monka.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm no dating sim connoisseur, but did you say pigeons? Because I think that's Hatful Boyfriend, which takes a really weird twist at the end. But yeah, Doki Doki Literature Club is something that you might need to brace yourself for because it goes in a direction.
Okay, so it's two different things. So you have Doki Doki, and then you have another one that's with pigeons.
That's
I mean, listen, yeah. Or you could do what I did and play. I love you, Colonel Sanders, the finger-licking good dating sim from KFC. That was quite incredible. I did that on stream last year and acted out all the voices. It was quite the experience. But so obviously that doesn't exist, which is a shame. I don't know how Cypher sort of like works into all the because like I saw the translation of the Cypher one. He's like, oh, I'm married and I love my wife, but everyone else seems to be single and ready to mingle. I'm like, what the hell? Like, what am I like? Cypher's just there to provide commentary because he's impartial because he's married. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense.
Isn't like one of his lines talking about
I did for April Fools either.
Isn't like isn't like one of his taglines in the game is like, think about their kids or something like that with Cypher. I mean, that's dark if he's gonna be like a married dude.
Yeah, I mean that's true, but you know what? I'm sure there's plenty of professional assassins that have families. You know
true,
what I mean?
True.
You gotta pay the bills. He's an information broker. You know, what
Mr.
I mean?
and Mrs. Smith.
Exactly. Yeah. So good on Cypher. You know, I mean. Also showing that you can part also, but my thing is it's not Valentine's Day. Like I would have thought this would be the kind of thing you'd launch for Valentine's Day or sort of release for that. But we had some April Fool's patch notes, of course, for Valorant, because why not? First of all, that's fucking cursed. That's cursed. Get it off my screen. Yikes. The patch notes here never went live. Sorry to spoil it to all of you, but it's only fair that we listen to you at least once a year. So now they make changes. The premise of this is making changes in line with like some common player outcry. Some of this is just ridiculous. Like 5-second cooldown between charges of flashpoint. God.
That would actually be pretty awesome. And I wouldn't be opposed of Brimstone getting 100-second smokes. Maybe he'll get picked more.
I love this one. Spycam formerly known as Cypher. Cypher is now replaced by Spycam. If the Spycam's going to inadvertently use pistols, we may as well go all of the way.
That one's the best. Melee weapons actually switching over to toothpicks so it matches their hitbox, because knifing in this game is quite damn hard. It is not the same as other games. It's so difficult to try to hit somebody with that.
I like the remote skill-based matchmaking as well. Like, it's all Call of Duty over here. This whole debate is started up again.
Server FPS has been capped at 15 to save money. I'm pretty sure they said the minimum spec was like a Pentium 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
Tactical VO will now call out the positions of objects in your home. Deleted the Prime Vandal. Everyone loves. I think it's just quite funny. I enjoyed this, not only because a lot of it was ironic and very self-aware, especially because Riot have said, hey, like our knife hitbox is actually a meme. Like we just wasn't really intending for it to be used all that like frequently, but we realized that people are on enough Adderall in this game that they might actually want to use that. So they have mentioned that they might make changes to that in the future. But yeah, good on Riot. That was always fun. And I mean, Overwatch actually put their patch notes into the game. That's a different story. That was an interesting experience. But finally, Ryan, we got a fucking butterfly knife in the game. Finally.
Yeah, actually, this after we got the karambit before, lo and behold, the butterfly knife.
What is it they say? As soon as you stop chasing happiness, it'll just come and slowly float down into the palm of your hand. It was such a zen moment, and then it's a fucking knife with butterfly.
I am literally not opposed to that.
I want it.
Yeah.
This is the problem when they. Oh, did you see the left hand as well?
Yeah.
You gotta get the full animation in.
That is.
Wait, there's just so much going on right now. That turtle is upside down in the background. You have Astra in her astral form just chilling on the wall. Is their turtle actually upside down on the actual map?
No, it isn't.
No.
You got the Valorant as well in the top, pointing like people can see
it. Look at the manhole.
Yeah.
Look at the manhole.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely been some changes made. Also,
Easter eggs.
This skin this animation will get you banned from the Cub Stadium. Like, it will get you banned from the Blizzard Arena. Excuse me. Can't just be throwing out like signs like that.
True.
Gang signs on the left hand. My God.
True.
Oh jeez. You can't be doing that.
I am not.
My God.
I am not opposed to this knife, to be honest. If it actually like is a, but if it's also a hint that a butterfly knife is coming though for the game, it's pretty dope. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
That and Sovereign 2.0 must be like the top requests, and even for hit scan, we just get it a lot. Like we had an interview with Arcane, who's like the main gameplay people. Talking about balance changes that could be coming to Jet and stuff. And there's people like, yeah, that's all well and good, but what about Sovereign 2? How about that?
Yeah,
and it's just like, he's not even the guy you're meant to be talking to about that. Like, Jesus, people are so thirsty for it.
I know, but you know what? I am like actually a simp for the Sovereign skins, because we got Glitch Pop 2.0, we got Prime 2.0, and I live for like the angelic fucking gold and chrome sort of, with the, I'm about that. And they didn't make a Phantom or a Vandal in the Sovereign skin.
Got a Guardian. We got a Guardian.
I'm just saying we got kind of screwed over there. Anyway, so yeah, even some teams got involved in it. Sentinels also got involved in it. Not bad. I like the pun. This is not terrible. What do you think, Vance? You like this? Huh?
Yeah, at first I was like, I literally was going to ask the question, but if Veli was here, he'd probably ask the question like, why 11s? But then we get it now because it's 10 and then it's 11s.
Are you implying that this joke would just go straight over Veli's head?
There's a possibility.
Yeah, it is. You know what? It's that about Veli that allows us to explore these things that we never would have asked ourselves. It's like, ever watched a baby just start to see the world and like how interesting it is just to see someone just interact with these concepts that you've taken for granted for so very long.
Look, put it this way though, he did have a hot take saying that Astro was like S tier, but look at the amount of time she's been picked over the last 2 weeks for VCTs, right? So he's on to something with these observations.
You bullied him so badly last week because he seemed so like coming out of his shell, like, I think Astro's S tier. You're like, you're fucking stupid. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. You tore him asunder. He's there just like.
I allowed him to impale himself on his own sword. You know, I would try and lead him down his own line of thinking and see where we get. The guy is unstoppable though. You can't like. It's just, mate, you might try and make him a fool the first time, but he'll just get back up and do it again. To be fair, he was the guy that predicted FaZe Clan like out of completely nowhere to win that challenges run right in qualifier.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, you need someone like him in the crew because
and it works.
He helps you. He helps you believe that sometimes it's the unlikely is possible.
Yeah, yeah. People are gonna start worshiping now. Like the hot takes he takes are actually coming true. So let's keep listening to Veli.
Did you know that they also increased Sky's mobility recently? If you're good enough, if you're skilled enough to make use of this, you can basically get Buckbeak the Hippogriff to fucking ferry you across the Ministry of Magic. Look at this.
Shout out to Strong Legs for providing us with this clip of whatever he's done.
So, yeah, I mean, if there's anyone, it's fucking Strong Legs. You know what I mean? Because Strong Legs is the one who's figured out how to get Guiding Light to go straight up the fucking nostril of players on every part of the map. Doesn't really matter where. It's just like, shoom.
Yeah, and even when he started like showing out like the fake guiding lights to come out, it doesn't pop so it could swing out for kills. Like he's played this agent so well. But yeah, let's actually not give the credit to Roy, but let's give the credit to Satchel Jump, of course, as you can see on the bottom right. This, of course, is going to be an April's Fool. It actually did fool Ian, by the way, our producer. So
yeah. First of all, activate your fucking Windows, dude. Jeez, monetize this kind of content and buy it. God damn, dude. God damn. So this must be editing, right? Some form of editing.
I thought it would have been no clip. Yeah, that's what my guess would have been. I like the wide sky as well, just in case you went sold.
I like the wide sky. I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. So if I had seen this the first time, I would have thought, okay. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I'll be honest with you guys. I know Riot's really busy, yeah. But I would have loved to see some of their changes in like a separate game mode, just to fucking see what it's like. It's actually still content. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I'm not often going to hold Overwatch next to Valorant and go, hey, Riot, you should do this. But it is like to see some of that stuff how it plays out in game is actually quite hilarious. Now, am I saying that you should have a 100-second brim smoke in the game? Maybe not. But there was some cool changes on the experimental patch in Overwatch that allow people to, and all the googly eyes were
great, yeah.
Yeah, until you had to change the skins, though. That was a little unfortunate. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is that. I mean, what can you do?
I wish you kept the googly eyes.
In chat, Lord Alexis wants us to talk about Ascend coach IGLing for them because they got the wrong rules and Heretics didn't know they could talk. Well, we're probably not going to talk about that, but we're just going to acknowledge that sucks. But maybe Ryan knows more about that. But quite often we get on this show like there's a topic that someone really wants us to discuss, and we hadn't really sort of planned it out. Some of the stuff is also, I mean, fuck me, like I watch Twitter, but there's been no EU games to watch, so yeah,
exactly.
No Lord Lexus.
I mean, I guess we could talk about that when we get to the Europe section, but generally it seems like it was one of those. Oh, it was just miscommunication, which, to be honest, is Europe summed up pretty well, to be fair, but no harm, no foul, it seems.
I would rather miscommunication than none at all. Yeah. Would I? Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe sometimes. Maybe just a little, like a sign of life, a blip, maybe on the EKG from Riot in Europe. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, Lord Lexus. No, can't say that we loaded the show with topics such as that one, but something we do want to talk about is some of the roster moves from this week, as is tradition, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, still a bunch of changes. The first one being that Dignitas has disbanded their well, they're not their male team, basically. Yep. Yeah, they disbanded their male team. From how this reads, it doesn't seem like they're going to be looking to replace that roster. They will continue to field their women's roster, and that will be their only offering in Valorant.
Yeah, I am quite sad to hear that. Hopefully it's going to come back, but at least for now, it does have the assumption or the illusion that we're not going to have anything coming more out of Dignitas with that too. Very, very sad actually, because it's a great organization. They had a lot of hype about it when he came back from the old logo to the new logo back to the old logo, and we're like, oh my god, this is going to be great. But the team just didn't perform. And I think it's one of those moments, which we're going to talk about at the same time with SSG, is when these teams have been trying for a very long time to just get out of at least groups to make it into close qualifiers. And after months and months of trying, it's not working out. You're about to throw money out the window here.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that from their perspective, Dignitas have a much greater shot of sort of really bringing a lot of attention and a lot of equity value to the brand name in the female scene right now, in the women's scene. Sorry, I think they have a really good roster, one that's really competitive, and and it might just be that they don't really have a budget allocated for 2 Valorant teams, and if they're hedging their bets, then yeah, I don't blame them. Because I think that their women's team is better positioned right now to be like a front runner, at least one of them. It sucks though, because that team is sick. They did sort of write down, or they did mention in that post that they're actively looking for a home for these players, which kind of makes me think that I wonder if there's like a existing obligation for Dignitas in terms contractually. Maybe there's why they're trying to look, because not all teams do this. When they drop a team, they don't all go, well, look, we're trying to find homes for these players. Presumably they're not shopping them out. There should be no buyouts at all. So yeah, I don't know. I'm interested because I'm pretty sure that the players can probably shop themselves just fine. It's curious though.
Yeah, do they want to stick together or not? That's the other thing, right? Because
seems so.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no way that Dignitas can have buyouts for this team, right? If they've dropped them, like they can't do that. Yeah,
I don't think so.
I don't think that's a thing. I think it's just, I mean, obviously there's other examples that we're going into, but it feels that this isn't going to be an uncommon thing when it comes to teams dropping, because, I mean, look at the direction and the competitive teams up there. With Dignitas there, yeah, maybe, if this team had a bit more time, but certainly when you look at the direction that other Riot games have gone in stuff, you do have to be a front runner. If you're not a team, then you need to be one of those organizations that were in there early, did their own ignition event for good stakes and stuff. And I think Dignitas weren't really that passionate about being involved in the long run for Valorant and Riot, because, I mean, do you blame them? A lot of orgs probably wouldn't want to be involved unless they're like, the G2s or the Sentinels, that if they ever go in the franchise direction, then yeah, maybe you could definitely see those organizations. Dignitas, not as much. So it's more of a case of let's look in other games and do other things and go in different directions.
I wonder, I mean, yeah, so obviously a very valid point brought up by Scott here, obviously someone who's deeply involved in the CSPPA. Is that just because they closed the team, the contracts might still be... I thought they would release them from their contracts, but that could be an issue. It explains why they're trying to find them a home. If I'm a team that's getting shopped these players out, knowing that Dignitas are closing the division, I'd be like, what the fuck's your buyout so high? Like, what are you going to do? You're just going to sit these players in contract purgatory? They can't play for any other team, but they're not going to play for you. So unless there's like a workaround where they can play as like an unsigned roster still under contract for Dignitas. If Dignitas don't want to field them, they don't want to field them. I don't know. I also understand why they would want to wait. People have to remember, excuse me, this is not the same Dignitas that sort of thrived under the leadership of OD. This is not OD's Dignitas anymore. It hasn't actually been OD's Dignitas for quite some time. So OD was the kind of person who reminded me much like Jack Etienne, or one of the sort of original sort of endemic esports owners who would fund teams not because it was a good business decision necessarily, but because they were passionate about the scene and about the supporting the players. Like I haven't gotten that vibe necessarily from Dignitas as an organization since he departed, I think. So I mean, that's fine. I think their roster also, there's no reason why they can't become like a BBG now, right? These rosters that are competing in opens that are now, that did a lot of homework, that read up on the Masters teams, that come out and actually beat them in a best of 3. Like I don't think any of us, it's not inconceivable that they could have crossed that gap, forded that river, so to speak, and it started to become a real competitor in the region.
The team itself for Dignitas, when they played as a group and as a pug, I guess at this point going into the VCTs, they were playing against 100 Thieves, right? If I'm not mistaken, to try to qualify. Yeah. So they still are a team that could perform very well, but I guess it's just like one of those moments where they were homeless, when they were actually literally called homeless and they were playing well. They get picked up by Dig. They start losing a bunch of matches, and then now they get dropped by Dig, and then now they're starting to win matches again. Maybe it's just like the pressure of performing under the organization, or just maybe a little bit of a curse for those players.
Also, I guess when you look at the team that they brought in, Shanks and Poised, I mean, obviously they got dropped for various reasons. And, you know, it's Dignitas. We got these really good players early on in that roster. Things were looking pretty good for Dignitas to be considered, you know, tier 1 maybe. But obviously with Shanks and Poised going elsewhere, them trying to find replacements, spending a lot of time with like Odorous. They picked up Maka, that was a good pickup. It just felt like they had the right idea early on, but ever since, it's kind of like what T1 and Cloud9 have been doing at the moment, just flicking through players, trying to find what works to get some form of consistency. Then you look at teams like NRG, for example, that are still struggling to do that. Is it worth the money to try out all of these players and get them on small contracts? I guess that's the main question for Dig. And like you said, I think when you've got the stuff with game changes and stuff going so well, and knowing that there's a pretty decent prize pool behind that, and just being able to be on a stream and be broadcasted on a consistent basis and be considered a top team in that sort of region, I guess you could call it, then yeah, it's just going to be more worth their time.
I think we also have the issue of these, you know, I'm hearing from maybe someone in this chat knows something about this, is that some of these player contracts are pretty inflated relative to, I don't know, let's say the return on investment that like a Valorant team provides on average right now. That also might be an issue for a team like Dignitas or someone like that to be able to find out. Vincent in the chat asks, was there beef? Don't think so. If you're referring to the Dignitas situation, nothing that we sort of know. I just, you know, I was already questioning. I don't think if Odie's running that team, or if he's deeply involved in those team operations, I don't think Odorous gets dropped the way he does at all. You know what Odie does? Odie walks up the fucking hill to Odorous's house with cabling over his shoulder and actually fucking hooks him up. Make sure his internet doesn't drop out. You know what I mean? At least that to me is it kind of that like old school approach to sort of how one supports and sort of runs esports teams. You know, I haven't really seen that from Dignitas. They had great success, I think, in Rocket League more recently, but in League of Legends and now in Valorant more recently, they've just not really been able to do a whole lot there that's really lit the world on fire. So, you know, I don't know if you guys know any other sort of divisions in which that team seems to be doing well, but it feels like they're almost going the Immortals SEG way and sort of just, you know.
I was going to mention that because I don't know if they're in Rocket League or not, right? But if you're thinking of divisions and maybe payrolls on that side, so I'm thinking about their CSGO team, right? And nothing against them because I fucking love those guys. It's Forrest, Freiberg, Hauser, Heap, and Lekro. But Forrest, Freiberg have been long-standing, with high tenure into the CSGO scene, even in CS 1.6 and CS Source. I'm pretty sure that salary is pretty high for that CSGO team. And if I want to compare their CSGO roster with their their Valorant roster, I think I would have given more chances for their Valorant roster to succeed rather than their CSGO roster right now.
Anyway, that's something we keep up with, I think, and see if Dignitas maybe get back involved if there is a world where, as Jay Rush sort of pointed out, that franchising becomes an option and might actually become attractive. I am very interested to see, you know, a model that, you know, especially in a game that is still young and still will be young like Valorant, a model that sort of makes franchising sort of make sense without like a relegation system, right? Like if there's a franchise model that involves purchasing of slots or guaranteed slots, as opposed to relegations that we see in Europe, how that turns out to be worth it in the risk-reward spectrum for owners. That stuff's fascinating. I'm shit at that kind of business side of esports, but I always want to learn about it. Let's talk about another team that has bowed out of the race, so to speak. Van City, you're a big fan of these guys. Yep. Even though you bought all their merch, they still weren't able to fund their team. No, I mean, we don't know that's why. But Space Station Gaming have decided to part ways with their roster. Boostio, obviously, previously a very high-ranking Overwatch player. Roker as well. I mean, we remember him going way back. He was on Complexity, on multiple teams. Profi as well was a PUBG pro. And Ranger gets dropped from this team. So Space Station Gaming still wants to be involved in Valorant. So this makes me feel like it's a different decision to Dignitas as opposed to what, you know, I mean, they at least maybe have designs on fielding a team in the future.
I would definitely think that as well. I think for For SSG, it's like, okay, we're just trying to find like a good solution right now. Maybe do we want to invest smaller, kind of like an Equinox style, or do we want to go for bigger names? We want to look at the free agents pool to see what we have available right now. But I think if they're going to drop Boostio and Roka, I mean, they're great players, and Ranger was a great player or coach in Rainbow Six, and it was a great coach here in Valorant. So what direction do you want to go? Do you want to have like do they have the money, first off, to be able to get the higher buyouts for the higher players, or do they want to start building from the ground up again and make it less expensive? Because again, that's another team that hasn't been getting those results that we wanted. Towards the end of 2020, I did like it though, because it was kind of like them and BBG that were like starting to climb up. And then they just hit a wall, and then suddenly BBG is continuing to grow, and SSG just stayed there, and they still couldn't climb that wall. So what do you want to do right now for SSG? I think if you want to bring that brand out, you got to put that money up.
Is it worth it though at this point? Like,
yeah.
Shit, man. Especially when here's the thing, right? I mean, you can maybe comment on this as well. Your fucking teams that competed in Masters have to compete in open qualifiers and challenges. Like, it's a hard motherfucking reset, my guy. And if you don't compete in Masters, you don't get circuit points for fucking champions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like SSG were just never a real team that contended. I think we've seen periods of like Built by Gamers doing well in tournaments. Even Equinox would do really good in like the Winter Championships. I think they came third or fourth, right? So pretty good result when it's got teams like Envy and Sentinels being the main teams in there. But I do think that it's just a team that have never really hit a consistent margin. Dignitas always looked like a team that could maybe sneak their way into the top 8 of a tournament like Masters, for example, or First Strike. SSG always felt like they were a consistent top 16 team, but they were there to make up the numbers, as bad as it sounds. Not that these players individually couldn't have a great series. Roka's a really good example of that. But there were a lot of time when you're kind of sat there watching Roka going, come on, do something exciting, man. Come on. And
poking it with his stick.
Yeah. But you know that he could do that. It was just on such an inconsistent basis. And really, if you are an org like SSG that does super well in stuff like Siege, by the way, I think they're like considered the best team in North America.
Yeah.
I might be completely wrong. Belly can tell me off on that one. But they've got other games that they're doing much better in, right? So why waste so much money in a super competitive scene that seems to be just pissing away money at this point, let's be honest.
And I think Roka was like that first player where it was like, wow, his sheriff is fucking good. It's like Roka is gonna be one of those heavy fraggers, duelist, entry fraggers that's just gonna carry the team on his back. Exactly. And then until a proto came in with that sheriff, and now everybody talks about a proto sheriff instead. But I mean, just think about Dignitas and Space Station disbanding, and then quickly before we started the show, I was like, off the top of my head, who can I think about that's like free agent right now, right? So you have the Dignitas roster, the SSG roster, you have the Equinox roster, you have Superman, Odorous, Rob Wiz, Foe, the Honkabakaloos. Like, there's so many players right now that are available to get picked up. So maybe you don't want to sign like those big names. And there's potential that off these free agents, you could still build something very good.
Sorry, I had a producer in my ear scared the shit out of me. Let's keep moving on here. Obviously, Sonics have sort of officially announced what they're doing. We kind of knew what the Sonics project was, because Exo Clan were coming over to the United States and and getting ready to compete here. So this Sonics Valorant, this is an Australian team. I am familiar personally with Ian and Dizzy, who were Counter-Strike players in Australia. I casted them back in Counter-Strike Go like years and years ago. So by all accounts, veteran roster here. Quite an ambitious project, really, plucking the undisputed best team in Oceania out of Oceania and moving them to NA. This is now, from my understanding, this is a Pennsylvania-based organization. I don't actually know where the Aussies are. It's a long trek to get there, but maybe they're on the West Coast, and that's fine. Except they might just have to deal with server issues like 100 Thieves do, Omega lol. Their debut though was. They had to play. Look, they went up against Sentinels, I think, and that was always going to be a tough game for them. They looked pretty good on Icebox, and then they looked shite on Split.
Yeah, they looked terrible on Split. But Sonics, I remember that organization from seeing them in the first time in Rainbow Six again. I'm not sure exactly where in the States, as you said here, Uber, but they did make
They're in Harrisburg. It's the actual capital of Pennsylvania, but it's not exactly. It's a college town.
Yeah.
I've actually been there a couple times because I've worked on Harrisburg University's esports tournament. They run like an event for that, which is sick. They're pretty esports savvy as a town, but yeah, I mean that's interesting place to be to compete.
But it was like a nice warm welcome to like, hey, this is what it's like when you're gonna step out of Oceania and then come play some Valorant in whether you chose Europe or North America. And if you think you had better chances in North America because Europe maybe might have some tighter competition, well, it was a rude awakening to play against Sentinels and get 13-0'd on split. It did not look good at all. It was just. I think even Sentinels that matchup were just literally pushing down mid on defender side quite often. Like I was actually, I didn't get to watch the game. I was actually listening to it because I was driving home from the gym. But good job to Upmine and you don't have to mention it. But then Upmine and Sully, first off, great job to those guys to be able to provide that commentary for me to be able to picture that matchup in my mind and see how things were going. But it just looked like there was a lot of pressure that was being pulled down on Sentinels down mid where Sonics just didn't have an answer, and when it came down to those individual duels, you're just losing those as well. So sure. There's going to be some practice to be done here for Sonics.
So I think there was an interview. I think it was with Dizzy. I'm not super sure that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm going to quote the interview roughly. And they sort of believe that 6 months or so they will be a top 4 team in NA, or at least very much towards the top echelon.
I remember hearing that.
It's ambitious, no doubt about it. I do want to point out that there is a precedent of Australian Counter-Strike players having pretty strong pedigree, right?
Yeah.
Right. JKS is kind of sequestered away in complexity right now, and just sort of but I mean that Renegades roster, that we sort of saw come to life eventually with Istillo and Azur on there. They definitely eventually achieved some pretty reasonable results there. That was the roster that Sponge was initially on. They had to sort of they cut him and they really started to show off some great performances. I mean, is it Dexter that also plays on a team in Europe now? So it's not as if the region is just bottomless, but you have to understand the only competition happening right now in Oceanic Valorant is the one they're paying casters like $30 a day to do. Like the Oceanic circuit. It's just kind of even in the interview, I think whoever it was, Dizzy, who was kind of like, yeah, there's not much going on right now in Aussie Valorant, So there is, and I can speak to this from personal experience. If you really want to give yourself opportunities to challenge yourself and to grow in esports, getting out of Australia is step number 1.
So it feels bad.
Yep. It's just how it is right now. It's still a fucking clown card out there in terms of esports tournaments and integrity. That shit's just, forget about that. Prize pools aren't really quite there. The support for the scene's not great. They just closed the doors on the Oceanic Pro League, which was their LCS equivalent in OCE, where they were playing LAN. They got rid of that. Now OS players, some of them got rescued by NA teams because they weren't considered to take up an import slot if they're from Australia, because, Australia was considered for all intents and purposes a part of NA for the sake of import rules and stuff like that. So yeah, you need to get out of Australia if you want to take on some of that sort of more higher caliber competition, I think. Right now, there seems like Legacy and Mindfreak, I think, Wolves in Oceania, who are also looking pretty good. But really, it's very, very hard to take the temperature for these rosters until you put them against international competition. And again, we live in an era where that's very, very hard. We'll see. I'm not sure about that one. The next news is interesting. NRG are making some changes, but it's not to their players, gents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually Chet. So Chet Singh decides to step down. So them both together mutually part ways. And when Chet tweeted out, he's like, hey, I'm decided to step down, and I'm looking at my options from CS, Go, and Valorant. So that's the interesting one for me. It's is he looking to explore to go back into CSGO? Was he not having fun in Valorant? What happened there within his coaching style in Valorant? It's sad. It's definitely sad news, but Chet is definitely one of those big minds that I think will go very far no matter where he goes. But if I look at the situation of NRG's Valorant overall, Like they've gone through so many roster changes as well. So there's a lot to adapt every single time. So it's not easy for the role of a coach to be able to do this. To adapt all the time is what I mean.
I can tell the chat is very well connected because he just basically is. I always just see him telling people from different teams to come TS and hang out. But I'll be honest with you, like I've seen a lot of his tweets in terms of like things he'd like to see for the game as well. And it's clear to see that Chet spends a lot of time thinking about Valorant and thinking about how the game can be improved. I think it's been a little bit hard to see his watermark on this NRG roster because of the changes that they've made. I think it's hard enough as it is to see the impact of a coach on a team in a young game like Valorant as it is, right? Like unless you see a team that really reads their opponents well, but even then, like Sentinels, like that is the responsibility of Shazam. Like Shazam quite often is the one that is conducting these reads. So, hopefully Chet's able to sort of land on his feet because he seems to be, in my opinion, one of the more prominent coaches. Like Taylor, I also think even Psycho or all very interesting to hear takes on from these guys. I like to see Chet on more podcasts. I like to hear a little bit more of his opinions. But yeah, it's clear to see that NRG have spent a fair bit of capital on putting this roster together. And I think there's also an admission like, oh, come on, like this can't be a player issue. Like surely it's got to be something else. So, Vance, I don't know what you think about NRG, but it's clear that they're missing something right now. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the show, but they're not quite where they want to be. And considering the caliber of players on their roster, you have to wonder why.
They're still always very close, though. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, right? Android and Tex literally just joined in the last like 2-3 weeks, so you got to give him some time. You got to give him, some room for Daps to rethink things over, especially now that they lose Chet too. It's just like, okay, well, now he's gonna have to carry a little bit more for the team in terms of like studying how he wants to plug Android and Tex into this whole synergy of what they have as a roster.
Why do you think they dropped Chet so quickly after like these roster changes? Don't you think they would like ideally allow some time to see if Chet works with these new players that they got picked up?
Man, I think a lot of people would sort of point the finger at Daps a little bit as being the sort of main connection and everything else around him constantly changing. Whether it's up to him that this roster's been basically a walking door of players going in and out is obviously remains to be seen. But I'm sure even if you look at the results that just happened with NIP, that was the European version. Look at all of the players that ended up leaving NIP. You've got the likes of Yassine, Zipan, all of these world-class players that they just let go because they had them on short-term contracts to see how they would do on a trial basis. But then they brought in Emil, and Emil was like, I want these players, and I want a good amount of time and full authority to decide when changes come in. So that's what I want to see out of NRG is kind of go, these 5 players that we have right now, we're sticking with, and we're going to make this work in particular. It's the opposite of what Dig and SSG have been doing, right? Where they've kind of gone, we don't really have the capital to contest with these top teams in North America, so we're going to bow out of the race for now and maybe come back in with a new team later on where things are a little bit more concrete and the scene makes a lot more sense. NRG, because it's, the San Francisco Shock, you've definitely got the feeling of when they were very early, nascently into the scene, that it was, if we dedicate to Valorant, we want to dedicate properly. And I feel like, they're throwing their money around, they're getting some great players on the team. It's just about that sense of consistency, which is super frustrating to watch as an NRG fan, is just any of the teams that they had over the past couple of months, barring Infinite, of course, for various reasons, could have gone a long way. They just actually need time to gel together, which is, it's a joke that they haven't allowed that so far.
Yeah, the roster's fucking stacked now with the Tex pickup as well. Like this team is really quite frightening. There's no reason why they shouldn't be like they're knocking on the door of tier 1 here.
You got Som and EU in there, so definitely that team is looking strong on paper.
Som,
right now,
EU, Daps, Tex, fucking hell, dude.
And Android. Yeah, I think they have finally the main. Well, not finally. I always thought that they had the ingredients. It's just like they're always changing up the spices, I guess.
I still think Som's one of the best smokers in NA. I'm standing.
What a pivot from him, like sort of playing the main duelist sort of jet role to then move on to that. It's just been so good. But it is like the Manchester City, I suppose, of Valorant, where it's just You just want them to like stick with something and stop throwing like oil baron money around when it comes to picking up these players, because they have it. Like, I don't think Chet was the problem, but I would like to see him go to another team. Maybe not Envy, because I'd like to see Mike's get the job, to be honest. But there's a lot of teams that are looking for coaches that I think he'd be a good fit for.
Now that I think about it too, is because we're talking about how Dignitas, you know, they've tried and tried with like the same players for quite a long time and didn't get results, and now unfortunately the team disbands. Same thing for SSG. They've been trying for quite a while with the same Elise core, and it hasn't paid off. And then now you look at TSM. They've been sticking around since the very beginning until finally Brax joins in. But again, we'll talk about that later. Nothing's changed, but at least they're still sticking with that core. Yeah. FaZe has been sticking with that core for the longest time. We're finally seeing good results from FaZe, and we're seeing a dominant team, or a team that does have potential to do very well in the scene. So how much longer do we want to wait with energy? Should they stick with this five for a long time, or should they still go through this revolving door?
I mean, Jesus, if this roster doesn't work, like there's a chemistry problem with the individuals on it. Like there can be no other answer. Like the pedigree is just fucking insane. Cause in the chat wants us to talk about problems with T1. Look, we were a little bit tight on time today. We did actually, I think, discuss that last week or the sort of week before. But yeah, if we have a chance to touch on them today, we will. But we're pretty stacked in terms of content. Very quickly, let's touch on TSM's change. They've moved to a 6-man roster officially. So avoiding the pitchforks and torches of what would happen if they had dropped Hazed, presumably. Brax comes in here as the 6th player. TSM makes his announcement. Obviously, Brax is, ironically, there's Jet behind him in that picture, but he is a Sentinel player these days. Thoughts? I just want to connect some initial thoughts from you guys. We did discuss it last week briefly, but yeah.
I think initially we were asking, or we were wondering, what was the composition of TSM was going to look like? Is it Brax literally going to be playing a Jet? Is that going to reshape how TSM is playing their agent pool? And technically they did, because you put Drone back onto a Sova, you put Sabrosa onto a Phoenix as a duelist. But the thing is, you brought in Brax and you plug him to what Hazed would be playing. So you're changing a Sentinel to a Sentinel. So technically, even if they didn't have Brax into the roster right now, and they still did the agent change,
they could have done this with Hazed.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So there was no difference there. I guess it's just to give him time to get used to the synergy of what TSM is like right now, because TSM are still trying to find their composition. We're asking about that. We were wondering that last week as well. So I think it's just going to be, in the next few weeks, probably Brax is going to be playing a different agent than a Sentinel. That's what I foresee in the future.
Oh, you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think so. You cannot plug a Sentinel for a Sentinel, because I've said it again that Brax is not anywhere better than Hazed, nor is Hazed better than Brax. I think they're both very good individual players.
Are you honestly going to stand there and say that you think that they are pound for pound equally talented, equally powerful players?
Yeah, in their own roles, because Brax for me is a type of player that is going to be that lurker that gets the clutches for the team, right? And that could be what is potentially needed for TSM right now, to have a lurk role, because Sabrosa used to do it, and now that he has to play a Phoenix, he can't really do it, right? If he was going to play, let's say, a Smoke. But Hazed is going to be very good in his own ways too, from being a good anchor player as a Sentinel player for the team. So he's able to lock down sites and still able to put multi-frags for the kill, and he has that seniority that could actually boost the confidence of his teammates too. So I think they both bring equal value, and they are pound for pound, just on different levels.
Okay, it's different styles, but they are obviously play. So I think that it's going to be hard to match the gravitas that Hazed, I think, brings into a team if you sort of switch them out. So Drone is playing the Sova now. We kind of get what we wanted, where Sabrosa looked good on Omen, like he really did. But now Sabrosa has been sort of freed from the smoker role, and Cutler was playing a bunch of Astra. I mean, we will talk a little bit more about their matches, because they looked pretty bad. TSM, but TSM have always been that team to try shit, right? They always try shit. They were the only teams trying single duel. They went from triple duels to single duels in like a week. They will try that stuff, which is kind of fine. But let's talk more broadly about 6-man rosters, because we touched on it last week. It's still relevant because we continue to get new evidence to sort of either support or refute the idea that 6-man rosters are good or bad. In CSGO, this was done a little bit, right? This 6-man roster thing was tried. I feel like, but since then it's been outlawed by Valve, right? Am I wrong to say that? Like they used to swap players within like a series, and now they don't. What do you think about this?
I think there were some rules in Counter-Strike that made it more difficult. Like, if I'm remembering of what Vitality said about this, because I think the way that Astralis and Vitality did it was very different. Astralis, it was effectively you would have 6 to 7 players on the team because 1 or 2 of them at any given time would be taking a break because of burnout. Because that was the main thing about Counter-Strike, certainly over the last 2 years before the pandemic really hit. A lot of these players were traveling around the world, would spend over 250 nights in a hotel out of a full year, right? So they needed time off. And so the extra 6th and 7th man was there to basically cover for them whilst they took some time off, really. Vitality was a little bit more of a map dependent kind of meta, I suppose, where they would have Nevera, I think it is, Scream's brother, playing on certain maps. Like I think Inferno was the one that he played, but typically it was more, all right, if they play on Mirage, then this player plays. If they play on Dust 2, then that player plays. I'm not really sure the meticulous detail of it, but that's essentially how Vitality went around it. But with some recent rule changes, they turned around and said, it's not worth us doing that anymore. So that's really the only typical way that I've seen it used, other than, of course, other games like Overwatch, which double the player count.
Yeah. That's where I think Overwatch shines, though, right? Because based on what you were saying, that's my thought of looking at Overwatch too. It's going to be like, hey, whatever map this is, we could actually use this player instead. I mean, you know this more than I do, Uber, but I think this makes sense, and I think we kind of see that maybe from League of Legends with their academy teams, are sometimes swapping players in and out from week to week. But I think they're in a right direction here for Overwatch League. But when I look at Valorant for now, or when I look at CS again, I don't see the value of it yet. I wanted to make it. I want it to look like it was in Valorant as it is in Overwatch, where you have a player that's an expert as. Okay, actually, you know what? Let's take Cloud9 White.
Right?
Yeah, Cloud9 White, for example, right here is that you're gonna have Alexis that's going to play a Sage on certain maps, but then maps where they don't need a Sage, they're going to swap out even Anidro and then put Alexis and Jazzykins as a raise in there so that they could actually not have to use a Silva. So I think that makes sense in that case. But when I'm looking at how it's growing in, let's say, Europe and North America for let's call it the men's size for the lack of better definition, it's not working because you see that 6th player eventually replace the 5th player and they're just getting dropped.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the precedent, right? We've so far, we have seen the 6-player rosters only be 6-player rosters for a short time, and then they go back down to a 5-player roster. We talked about this last week. We memed about it a little bit, but Sick sort of expressed his opinion on 6-man rosters in Valorant and sort of how that it would affect the sort of players and stuff like that. Obviously, like, let's just say my take wasn't exactly empathetic. We'll get to that in a sec, but what he points out, first of all, he says it creates unnecessary pressure on players to perform. That's subjective, let's be honest. Even if nobody wants to admit it, everyone's fighting for a spot in the team. That should be happening anyway. But this last part is, I think, actually relevant and not some sort of really low T kind of take. He says that aside from that, it can easily make the team lose direction, how they want to approach the game. Depending on what that player is that you're subbing in and out, like I definitely feel like it can change a lot of things, because your structures and protocols are predicated on the individuals that take part, in calling and how information is passed along. For example, for TSM, Hazed was doing a decent amount of calling, bouncing off of Cutler. He was getting involved in a lot of these decisions. He was a voice in the team. From what I understand about Brax, especially if he's just coming to TSM, I don't know how vocal that you would expect him to be. I don't think anyone has ever mistaken Brax for an IGL either. You know what I mean? I don't like, just as you sort of pointed it out when you compared those two players.
Yeah.
Brax is quite different in terms of, and listen, I don't sit in the server with the guy. You know what I mean? This is genuinely hearsay a lot of the time, and just some conjecture based on, his character. So, I was like, oh, stop whinging. Like, you should be fighting for your spot on the roster. But there is a point to where, in Valorant, like, so much of how information flows and like the workflow of a round and how you conduct and execute and how you deal with information that you gain or information that you just don't have, I wonder if is really wise in the long term to rotate players in and out. And in fairness, Hayes hasn't been rotated in. He's been sat on the bench. And that happens a bunch in traditional sports. Some motherfuckers just sit on the bench, collect like a modest salary and just chill. In Overwatch, this also happened. So we had these 12-man rosters. But what was more often the case is that it was a solid starting 6, and then maybe 1 or 2 of those bench players might rotate in like this. So this Hangzhou Spark roster is a good example. You got 4 DPS players here, right? Architect is is a super flexible player. Like he will play like Genji Fire or whatever. Solminsu is not. He's like a McCree hit scan player. The Widowmaker here, to my understanding, is Godsby, maybe Shy. What some teams in Overwatch tend to do is also try and fill their team up with representation from the home regions. So look, some of these players are Chinese, right? Hangzhou is obviously a Chinese city. And I think teams have realized it's quite important in terms of marketing to have some Chinese players on a Chinese roster, for example. But, Solminsu, Bernard, MCD, so I think Architect, Godsby, IDK,
Koreans.
these guys are Korean players, right? And a lot of teams stack their rosters with very good Korean players because, frankly, like they're just better. They've got a better incubation sort of structure in South Korea. They produce better players in general, but also the Chinese scene is also starting to come up in a big way, and Overwatch is hugely popular over there. The casters are like celebrities. I wish I could just let Mandarin and go over there and just fucking leave all this esports bullshit behind, just fucking chill behind the fucking the VPN curtain and just be famous in esports. But
there's one thing.
Yeah, so
sorry, there's one thing about the Overwatch League that I think is interesting when you think about this. Nobody considered having a 12-player team until the Overwatch League kind of put it forward as this is the max amount of roster that you can have. I think it's kind of similar right now where, let's say we have a Valorant League like the VCS and they say you can have up to 10 players in it. Then people, like nobody would have ever assumed that there would be 12-player rosters in Overwatch until the Overwatch League happened, right? If you're thinking of like the Atlantic Showdown and stuff, nobody would ever, they'd go, that's fucking stupid. Why would you ever do that? But it changes. And I think that's the same with Valorant. I also think in regards to like team sports as well, having benched players like in football, rugby, whatever, really, that only really works when you have like plus 10 players in a team because you can switch out a left back, a left mid player, right mid player, because it doesn't change too much of the focus of the team. But when you have 5 or 6 players that tend to be pretty close because they've had to play together and signed for so long, they're pretty good friends, they used to play Counter-Strike together, that is going to have a big dynamic shift. It isn't really the case of, you just take one player out, you put another one in. There's a lot of rapport. People sometimes will have to play with people they don't like as well, or will start to dislike because of the way the team is going in various directions, right? Yeah. So in a more intimate setting, you're going to see much more bigger impact of switching out even a better player for a worse player because that worse player got on well with everybody and he was the shining light in a team when things were looking bleak.
And what I have seen is that players in esports, at least like I have to use Overwatch as an example just because I have sat in scrim rooms and been to team houses and stuff. These players will literally fucking leave these cushy Overwatch League bench spots and join a tier 2 team because they want to fucking play the game. Like they are not happy sitting on the bench. They don't do it. They get burned out. I talked to so many of these players. They're like, fuck this shit. I mean, yeah, getting paid is fine, but I could have just finished college if I wanted to get paid. I mean, I'm trying to compete here. I'm trying to make use of these years and try and get better. And the problem is these players don't get any match condition practice experience and you barely get any lane experience as a result of that. And they say, fuck, I'm just going to join another team that will actually put me on a starting roster. Annie Dro actually pointed out something that's slightly tangential to this, but also really important and something that viewers and commentators alike could definitely benefit from knowing. And she says that she wishes Reddit knew how important team atmosphere and charisma is for star players. This relates to the TSM conversation. You can't just throw them onto another team and expect them to perform the same if they generally don't enjoy playing with their new teammates. So that's obviously the last part is like, okay, well, who knows? But the first part is really important. Charisma and atmosphere on a team, that leads us back, in my opinion, to the TSM conversation a little bit, because I think that Hayes would have or did add that. And I think that like it's, these are intangibles that it's impossible for viewers to perceive. It's impossible for casters. But sometimes we as commentators try and scratch the surface of this just a little bit, and try and play the psychological angle. Normally we do this in a very in a way that we're not committing too hard to an idea, but we want to discuss it, right? Talk about the psychological impact all the time. Bad casters talk about it all the time. The point is that it's really, really hard to know what like the atmosphere is like inside a team, but the honeymoon period is a real thing. We've seen it with a ton of rosters, right? And then they tend to sort of fall off a little bit. So that atmosphere accounts for a huge amount of teams' performances and shouldn't be, I think, underestimated.
I just want to think back to like Six tweet before that was saying like, you know, if you're always doing these roster changes, or adding, sorry, if you're adding a sixth player into your roster, you could easily make them lose direction of how you want to approach the game. But I think it's also very similar to think about the other side of the coin of Energy, for example, that's always switching out to one or two players to keep a 5-man roster that still lose a sense of direction because they don't have like the amount of time of practice to get into there. And then it goes back to what Andy Joe is saying is like, you got to keep that synergy in for the team too. So always rotating through rosters is not always the right answer, but is six-man roster, 7-man rosters, or 6 or 7 player rosters could be that solution, because now you're going to build that synergy, the camaraderie, and then finally get into those moments where you can get the players to shine on certain maps, or a team to figure out what the best synergy is for certain maps for certain players. I think it's still nice to explore the 6-7 man roster or player roster, sorry, but I don't know if it's going to be an immediate solution as of now in Valorant, or maybe in tactical FPS, right?
I want to unleash Ryan on a topic in just a second here. We just wrap up.
Let's
It's
go.
important to point out that Counter-Strike series are longer. Best of 5s and CS are really long. So like the vitality advantage of having a player to sub in. It's MR12 in Valorant, or sorry, I mean, whatever you call it, first to 13 is, people don't want to call it MR12 anymore. But yeah, so that also might be a difference. But let's talk about something that, listen, you guys should be proud of me, because I was so prepared for this show. I have watched all of the EU streams so far from VCT challenges. Aren't you fucking impressed? Brian, tell us what's going on over across the pond here in terms of the EU streams.
So the general gist is, over the past week, we've had some really good broadcasts in North America going over the open part of the qualifiers. Very big contrast, and there's plenty of iterations of that as time has gone on. Some of which, with the help of Mitch and his constant talk about what Nerd Street have been doing. But at least that's changed. For Europe, it stayed the same. We don't get an actual broadcast of the open qualifiers section, even up to the round of 16, which had some insane games going on. And because of that, we just can't build the narratives. We don't know what's going on with the likes of G2, Team Liquid. As somebody that tries to follow the scene to a point to kind of answer the questions on shows like this on what is going on with G2, I can tell you my answer. I don't fucking know. I can't see the games. They're not being streamed. There's nothing going on at the moment, and it makes it very difficult to care about Europe right now. And I just hope that this changes. I mean, what now? Like, if I go over to the Europe stream, it's the main one at least. There's 2.5K viewers, and the Valorant stream is 15K, which is a little bit better, but it's the fact that there's no broadcasted games. Also, bear in mind, not really sort of talking about myself here, there are casters that can't do any other region other than Europe. And there's 4 games, and there's 8 casters vying to be in that sort of thing, including the likes of Pansy, Hypoc, and Mitch. And then you got Average Jonas that sort of comes in and goes, yeah, I want to do a bit. Surely if you're a European caster that's sort of been making your way through, and I don't mean myself, like I'll be fine no matter what, but there are people that have done a lot of good work that will not get a chance to cast in Europe in any of the official VCT stuff. But most importantly, the orgs, G2 are putting in a ton of money for this team, and they can't even be on a broadcast. They can't build fans if their games have been streamed, and nobody really knows what's going on with these players. So I feel there's a lot of examples like this with the Europe LCS way back when, but I think this is much more different, and also going to be very careful with my words. This in itself, because this lasts for the rest of 2021 with this TO and everything that's going on, it could be really damaging for Europe in the future, I think, if they don't get a hold on it. To be fair, they have listened in other feedback and improved stuff, but it was changing a lot of the series from best of 1s to best of 3s, which should never realistically have been something that needed fixing in the first place. But I think that this is a whole different kind of worms. You have a lot of stuff to do with co-streaming and running your own broadcasts because of all of the different languages. a lot of laws in Europe. I know people kind of say that that isn't the case. It is. That's why there's no co-streams of the LEC that you can watch on stream. And yeah, it's just a really difficult thing that if you can't get people interested in the Europe scene, let's say the EMEA teams don't do well at Reykjavik, who's going to care about this scene? A scene that might have its own league at some point, and a lot of money goes into it. But if you're looking at stuff so far, and I say this with a lot of love and passion for the Europe scene, why bother?
But
this, I mean, you go, Vince.
no, sorry. I just wanted to ask at the same time too. Like, if we didn't have an issue of like co-streaming, or we didn't have the issue of like getting matches streamed, would that actually, would we have the same number of viewership and growth that we would in NA, just off your experience from watching NA right now, and then seeing where EU is at?
I think so. I think what it would do as well is it would allow certain content creators and streamers to elevate themselves to a point where they're not so much ambassadors for the scene, but you kind of get people interested in it a little bit more. I think of people like LS, for example, in the league scene, who is, you know, an ambassador of Korean play because he coached teams like T1, right? And so when you see him on like the LEC stream, for example, he's always like, Korea's the best region and stuff, don't at me. People like Monty and stuff did it for the Overwatch League and stuff, tearing off his shirt and showing the Korean jersey. I think having those people in the scenes to be the main people to go to, like, sure, you have, like, I'd like to consider myself, but if I don't consider myself, Bella's been taking a lot more interest personally, streaming a lot of the VODs and stuff. Obviously, Plat Chat talks about the region quite a bit, but other than that, when you compare who cares about Europe in comparison to North America via the viewership, even the Reddit and how often people talk about certain things, it's just night and day on a region that is typically seen as one of the strongest and one of the most innovative when it comes to compositions and the way that they play. Just not being able to get the spotlight that they respectively deserve.
Right. I mean, there's also the other end of the story where like other regions can't really prep on them. There's no tape, so
yeah,
there's like an advantage there for them. But that's really tangential. I mean, I spoke to Jonas. He just wants to fucking co-stream. He doesn't give a shit about casting. He'd rather co-stream if he had the option to do so.
Yeah, he just wants to be involved, but so many others do.
I get it. So I kind of understand that there are some issues when it comes to co-streaming, right? Do those issues extend to having an English-speaking broadcast for the open qualifiers? Like, is that actually the issue here? Do we know that? Because what's stopping them from co-streaming and what's stopping, you know, Freaks for You for having a fucking English broadcast? I'm not sure if these are the same things.
So this is me guessing in regards to why some of these games are broadcasted, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but I guess money. You know, you do a broadcast, you need to pay rates for people. And to be fair, when you look at the talent that they have for Europe with like Pansy, Hypop Mitch, they have some tier 1 casters, right?
Sure.
So the actual quality of broadcast is really good. And I'm not saying that some of the other regions aren't, for example. And you could definitely see in other regions like North America, they're honing talent. They're bringing in people like Tana Metro to get that experience and to climb the ranks. And he could certainly be up there as one of the best casters in Valorant in the future, no doubt. But I do think that it's one of those things where people want to help. Hell, even Pansy tweeted out saying, I will do this for free. Let me stream the guild. Who were they playing? I think it was like...
Which is already problematic as it is, but that's fine.
Yeah, but like, people want to do stuff for the scene, not because they want to get paid or to sort of increase their own branding, because they want to show these games off because they give a shit about the scene. And it's very difficult when you have people that care about something that want to fawn over and talk about some of these teams that really are in the discussion, but they can't because there's no expertise that they could bring because they never watch the games. Literally, like, there's a player that's coming for G2 called Ozzy. A lot of people are like, what's he like? Because we haven't seen him on a stream at all. We're looking at like the Spike.gg for
last time we
stats.
saw screenplay?
Exactly.
Yeah, they were just saying in chat, right? LBJ
chat?
was saying we didn't even see Yampy play yet for Liquid.
Exactly. Like, all I know from that is watching one scrim personally, how they played. And that doesn't tell me anything, right? Like, it's very hard to try and care about the scene. Speaking as a person that's tried to put myself out there as kind of like, I'll try and be the Europe guy, digest it all. It's very difficult for me to understand what's going on. And the amount of people have sort of come out and said that, like, this is really damaging. I mean, Sideshow saying it, he knows better than most when it comes to Europe.
if Josh is taking a break from snorting nutmeg and playing Pokemon to tweet something that's so hardly worded like this, then it's a thing. Like this negligence is very strongly worded from Josh, someone who is actually fairly safe and stays away from some of the more polarizing issues in esports in general. He is. This is about as strongly worded as you're going to get from Josh.
Yeah,
maybe that's why they're playing Pokemon, because they just can't watch any fucking games.
Well, to be fair, I mean, that's a whole other story. I think Josh has a lot of VODs to catch up on, to be fair, but he's a machine in that regard. He's got the work ethic.
100%.
Yeah, he calls this negligence. The stream schedule between NA and EU is obviously vastly different. Here's my question. I mean, here, by the way, I mean, this is NSG just being very good. Let me just make something very clear, though. Tournament organizers have to pay Riot to run this stuff. They have to pay Riot. There is a licensing fee that they have to pay with absolutely zero guarantee that licensing fee can be recouped running a fucking online tournament or broadcasting an online tournament. You kind of have to sell sponsors for this stuff, and you have to make sure your sponsors don't conflict with Riot sponsors for their actual in-house events. For example, you couldn't use, let's use Mountain Dew. You couldn't use Mountain Dew Game Fuel as a sponsor because it likely conflicts with Red Bull if Riot are already working with them, which we kind of know they are. So there are some precluded categories that you as a tournament organizer cannot sell sponsorship to because it would conflict. So your ability as a tournament organizer to make money off running one of these events with Riot, you're already having to pay out of pocket the staff, the casters, which you best believe they're paying properly now, and Riot's licensing fee to do this. So where do you make the money? Nerd Street Games is, without saying too much, their business model is a bit different. You know what I mean? They can sort of subsidize this for Riot because the way that they actually turn a profit from doing stuff like this isn't in the normal way. Or people like ESL, right? That was how they did it. They would come in and run an event for Riot. They would sell the sponsors, sell the tickets, all that stuff, and then they would, try and make money. But there's always a licensing fee that is involved in this. And, you list that when you tender for this event. It looks like you can see that Freaks for You are not listed as a broadcast partner for challenges here in Europe. Now, now that's interesting.
I know why.
This
kind of.
Go on.
So, like, there's a type of event called whitelisted events, which typically,
white
label even. Jesus. A good example of this is Blast. We know Blast, what they do, Counter-Strike, all that stuff. It's always on Blast's channel. But when they did First Strike, it was on this new Valorant _esports _EU _1. Christ, no, God knows what else. It wasn't on the Blast channel, nor was there any branding of Blast anywhere. I mean, you could tell it was the Blast office because of the setup, and it had Banks on it and Maniac and all that kind of stuff. But there wasn't Blast anywhere. The same way, if you check out the stream, you're not going to see any Freaks for You branding. It's not on the Freaks for You channel because they don't, or maybe Riot don't want it, or maybe it's a typical thing where they will want their branding to be on it. Maybe because it's Europe, they do things differently. But that's the main thing, is that people don't really understand this. I had this today as well, where I did like an interview with the main dev from the gameplay side of it. People asking him questions about the skins and stuff, the cosmetics. Riot is multiple pillars of different things, and Europe and North America are very different teams. That's why one of the frustrating things about Region Lock is that they both kind of do their own thing and don't really communicate with each other on that topic in particular. So NA are doing great. They're doing all of their stuff, and Europe are quite happy to do what they're doing. And Riot might be happy and content with the things the way they are currently, right? So it's a really difficult and frustrating thing to deal with. But I think it's important people understand that Riot, Freaks for You, Nerd Street Gamers, they're all their different entities, and they're not the best at communicating with one another because for the most part they don't need to, right? They just focus on their neck of the woods and focus on that alone. So that's kind of the difference between Freaks for You. I don't know if they're taking a lower cut. I don't know any of that, but that typically comes in with doing like a white label event, I'd imagine, right? Because you don't get your branding on there too.
I'm just
sorry.
I was
the
just
difference
thinking,
between white and blue label events, just so you guys know. Yeah.
Okay, because I was just wondering at that point, then, if Freaks for You, they weren't listed there, is it because that they are just...
Even if it's blue label, they probably should be listed there as a production partner.
Yeah.
So it could just be that someone hasn't fucking edited the page.
Maybe somebody just didn't know, because we didn't know until partway through challenges, right?
Yeah.
I would say, as good as Valorant is, there are a lot of tournament organizers who just don't see any fucking reason to work with them on challenges. Nursery games are different. They don't have to be tied to making a clean profit off the event in terms of selling sponsors versus the costs of running the event. But ESL are, Esports Engine are, I'd say Freaks for You are probably to a degree as well. So, you know, because here's what happens, right? This happened in the LCS. Like, the LCS was Blue Label. ESL ran the LCS, but it was the LCS. And it was a Riot branded event, but it was operated out of the LCS studio, the ESL studio in Cologne. Now, so ESL ran pretty much all of it, right? With the Riot Esports team was getting involved, but all the people on the ground, the actual the producers and stuff like that, a lot of them were ESL. Riot took that back in-house eventually in Berlin. They wanted to have more control. They wanted to change the brand. They wanted to modernize it, whatever. Eventually became the LEC. A fair few ESL employees went over to Riot. In fact, D-Man and Joe Miller were also offered to go and become Rioters. They both declined that. They stayed with ESL. But ESL was like, okay, not only do we not have the product, but also our fucking employees are just jumping ship now. Why the fuck did we spend all these years, building up this brand for you to fucking take it in-house and fuck off and take a bunch of our employees with you? You know what I mean? So I'm sure that there's a similar fear right now as well that, for those teams that for orgs that make significant investments in helping Riot build up Valorant in terms of these, these Blue Label events, what will happen when, if or when Riot decides to franchise? I don't necessarily see, a world where Riot don't just do it themselves. Riot now have the capacity to be their own tournament organizer and their own developer, right? It's also the same reason why you don't see many third-party Overwatch events, because first of all, it's fucking not worth it for these tournament organizers. There's not a profit structure there for them. And also, Blizzard have developed the capacity to run this shit themselves, which is what all developers usually want to do, because they don't have to deal with like a third party potentially like messing with their direction or their brand or their optics. They can control the whole narrative. They can do it all. Valve are the only ones that don't care. They've never been interested in developing the capacity to do that. And I would argue that in some senses, that's been good for their games. The Counter-Strike scene was allowed to exist in the way that it has in the past because Valve never tried to take it in-house, never tried to make it their own, never tried to, maybe that's why fucking tournament organizers like ESL were able to stay afloat. I know well, I used to work at ESL. They had to completely pivot from their structure of coming in and running these events. They all of a sudden, they got rid of their own producers. They started outsourcing staff, equipment, and everything because they couldn't afford to just fucking keep them in the office waiting for a tournament organizer to get them to run an event for them. They had to change their way when MTG got involved because developers were taking their stuff in-house and the old business models didn't work anymore. That's why NSG are able to do such good work, because they don't fucking live or die on whether Riot gives them a good deal.
Yeah.
But they are one of the very few TOs that have that freedom.
It also helps them to be synonymous with Valorant esports in North America as well. Nobody knew who Nerd Street Gamers were a year ago. Now they're very well known for being the Valorant TO, right? I guess just sort of finally on this, I think sort of speaking from this perspective, I want to say Europe has the potential to be great under Freaks for You. I don't think it's a problem with the TO. It actually kind of annoys me that they get so much flack. We don't know if this is a decision made from them or Riot to not broadcast the open qualifiers. All I will say is, if it's Riot or Freaks for You watching this, it would do the world a good. I think that NSG have built up a good faith relationship with the community in North America. It makes it very difficult to do stuff in Europe. It's always going to be hard to compare North America to Europe with how TOs run stuff because it's vastly different. Even the budgets are hugely different. Believe me, I know as a European content creator that the budgets over here are not that good. But I do think it's worthwhile, either if you just spend that extra money on the rates of the broadcasters to do those days, or whether you allow people, like I think of like Sam Nairi, who can not do another region other than Europe. Give her the chance to do those broadcasts. Give people the chance to either stream these on their own channels so they can at least get the viewership and get subscribers through their own means to do these top tier games. If you have people like Pansy turning around and saying that they want to cover these games, there is going to be a lot more people that want to do that would be happy to be involved so long as the circumstances are fair. I beg you, because it's worthwhile, and I hope that you consider this. Otherwise, it's going to be a really long year.
And real quick, sorry, and just because also there's just so many matches happening at once too, right? We're looking at an open bracket of X amount of teams. So if you're able to like just choose that bigger match and put it on that mainstream that you want to get it in, and then the other ones, like Ryan was saying, to be able to be covered by the community streamers, community casters, content creators, so that at least those matches will be streamed and their name will get out. They don't need to be on the main broadcast when they want to make it out there. They just need some content to produce. And right now we don't have the opportunity for that content to be produced.
So this issue in Europe, it may change soon. Kazra Fruity, who is, I believe, the head of global esports operations for Valorant, did an interview on the Washington Post where he sort of discussed this. So, he tries to give as simple an explanation as possible. It's the multilingual nature of Europe. And there are a lot of different countries in Europe that have their different requirements and such. And I think he makes a perfectly fine point. Ultimately, what works in North America isn't going to work in Europe.
Sure.
That still doesn't really excuse the lack of an English stream but we understand why like co-streaming can actually be a problem. That's fine. I know that this is a legitimate thing. It also, Jafruti also kind of passes the buck to the European localization team for Valorant Esports. He's like, listen, I'm global. The European crew will do this, you know what I mean, on their timeline, right? So it's a little bit of a nothing burger. The problem is that people we are getting to the point where people do need to accept that there is a legitimate issue with co-streaming and how that works in Europe, in terms of how, the content is served up to different countries, right? Like, for example, like you can't bet with channel points in some European countries. It's just banned. Like in the Netherlands, you can't do it. As an example, right? So you are dealing with, people think America is confusing enough with all these state legislation that conflicts, but it's far worse in Europe. So I get that. That is a legitimate, I've had it explained to me. I still don't fucking get it, but it's a thing. It's a whole damn thing. I think that we're dealing with sort of, two different issues though, guys, right? We got obviously the co-streaming and then the lack of fucking casting or anything being put on there. But listen, I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't exactly a long line of tournament organizers knocking on Riot's door in Europe to run their shit, because for the way that their business models are, it probably doesn't make any fucking sense.
I mean, that's a negative, right? If you've got a whole lot of Reddit people saying that Europe's been run to the ground by the TO, that Riot's going to see that and go, what the hell's going on? Especially the North American part, like the global esports part of it, see all of that and go, what is going on in Europe? So they sort of go in and check, and they understand why. Like I said, it just doesn't bode well for the TOs, who might be the one getting a lot of the flack when they don't deserve to. I just feel that this was a bit of a, like, Europe's always had problems, let's be honest. Like, we've had all sorts of pretty rough ignition events, but because that was early days, it was very easy to kind of gloss over that. Now, when you have going into an international event where North American teams will meet European teams in May, this is where you start to compare the regions and actually go, this isn't fair. Like, we don't have double elimination in this part of the closed qualifiers, for example. What would help? A B stream, have double elim, have more broadcasts, more talent, more games being broadcasted. Just, it helps a lot. But I think the main thing I want to say that a lot of people took from the Kazra thing is that, there isn't any laws that stop people from co-streaming. There is. I think he just sort of glossed over it in a case. Like,
yeah, he did.
Because like the LEC doesn't allow that as well. You have people at Ender coming out and saying it's not a thing here. B, I don't want to leak too much, but I've spoken to Riot people myself that say that this is a thing. So it's more problematic than maybe Kazra makes it out to be. So don't act like there's nothing stopping them, because there is. And it's not Freaks for You's fault that there's no co-stream. So people are connecting some really weird dots, and I'd rather the people actually complain about the things that deserve to be complained about to the right parties, right? Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. One of these days, maybe we'll get an interview about that and we can really dig into the specifics. But I mean, I believe it is astoundingly complex.
Yeah. It'd be nice to talk to that. Is it Crowler, the guy that said that we missed the mark with First Strike?
Crowler. Yeah.
I would like to talk to him right now. Not because, everything that's happened since to be like, you missed a marker. Not to be like that. It's just more like, I'm curious of where Riot stand with this, whether they're happy themselves, whether it's down to them. I think the main thing about a lot of this is it would be nice to get a couple of answers on how Europe has been run currently, because not saying anything just makes it hurt even more, I guess.
Yeah. I guess I just want to ask one real quick question because you guys are talking about laws and stuff like that too, and it's unfamiliar territory for me too. What's an example of one of these laws that doesn't allow for you to get these co-streams?
I think it's more like I know there's an image that I sent the guys when it comes to broadcasting rights, like for the LEC. And you look at all of the different partners and all of the stuff. For example, Freaks for You do the German broadcast for the LEC. I'm pretty sure. So you're seeing all of these ones. Trovo's obviously super involved because it's Tencent and Tencent is Riot. There's all of these partners. And I think that if you allow, I don't know, Mixwell to do a Spanish stream of maybe that's a bad example, like Hitbox, he's a Spanish streamer that follows the Giants games, right? If you allow him, then LVP can go, well, we're not going to pay as much money to do the Spanish broadcast of the LEC or whatever the Valorant equivalent would be because you're letting some Spanish streamers do that. You've got Greg F as well that's been super interested in the Valorant scene that accidentally co-streamed it when he shouldn't, but who's going to really tell him not to, right? He's got like 40k viewers watching him for that alone. So yeah, it's more about when you look at where the LEC makes its money for the most part, I imagine a good portion of it is broadcasting rights in various languages. If they allow people to co-stream, they lose that leverage to have people pay as much. Because if anybody could do why should broadcast right? Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
that's where they make their money.
Jesus Christ! Like, again, NSG don't live or die off broadcast rights. You know, they sell sponsors, but what they do is they get co-streamers to sort of send them their analytics. But you cannot. They do not equate, like Shroud's analytics viewers do not equate 1-to-1 with your viewers as NSG in terms of your sponsors. Like they don't want. It's great. It helps. But it's not the same. Like Overwatch doesn't have co-streaming. Motherfuckers have to like take a screenshot of the clock and put it on the screen so you can sync up the two streams and watch them because we sold the broadcast to YouTube for big money. Like that's a thing. And Riot are probably going to do that if they franchise this league. If they don't do it, then I'll be kind of surprised because that's a huge way of making money. It's kind of how you fucking pay people. So anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff to talk about there. We've even got an even deeper topic after the break because I mean, Anna Baumann, who is the EVP of Esports at Red Global, has been waiting in the wings to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in terms of match fixing, in terms of the scene there. So we're going to have a chance to speak with her, which is really valuable. I recommend you all stick around for it. We're going to be back on the other side of the break with that interview and more discussion about how VCT's been going down. Thanks for sticking with us through the break. Obviously, a lot of content to get through today, a lot of heavy discussion. We're dealing with some things that, frankly, are above my head at times, as I am still a child on the inside, and I talk about video games for a living. So that should tell you everything you need to know. Guys, I'm really looking forward to this next interview because in esports, especially over the last week or so, we've started to realize that there's actually been quite a lot going on in terms of investigations into potential match fixing from players in Counter-Strike, and it's also been sort of hinted that these players have transitioned across to Valorant. So it is something that directly affects the integrity of this scene that we love so much, and as such, beggars a deeper discussion. And to help us with that, I mean, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Anna Baumann, who is the EVP of Esports at Red Global. If you follow her on Twitter, you'll see great cooking and a lot of fandom for the team that is Rogue. But Anna, we have you here today. Very pleased to get you on board finally.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Now, for those that, perhaps like me or, deal with video games just as video games and haven't really had the chance to perceive so much of what goes on at the competitive level, dealing with integrity, dealing with sort of outside actors and all this kind of stuff. What can you tell us about your involvement in esports as a lawyer, first and foremost, but also with Red Global more broadly?
Yeah, so maybe I start with Red Global first, and then we get into the legal stuff a bit more. But as Scoots would say, 2 years ago, I decided to move to the dark side in esports and basically dissolve my private practice, my legal private practice, mostly representing players, stakeholders in esports. I was also quite engaged already back then in integrity topics, and I actually accepted a job on the team side. So now I'm EVP Esports, as you said, at Red Global, overseeing their esports properties. Hence, lots of fandom for Team Rogue because I'm managing Team Rogue, in fact. So we're doing quite well at the moment, but also our Call of Duty franchise, London Royal Ravens. So that's my day job. However, I'm still very engaged as a lawyer in the the community, in esports, in sports. And of course, I have this very deep background in integrity matters. I even once or twice represented players who were involved in the match fixing topics, so I know a thing about it or two. I'm also involved in ESIC, the Esports Integrity Commission, so I'm a judge on their disciplinary panel. What does that actually entail? I think it's always so great because ESIC is basically a sporting body that is very similar to a sports court, where you sometimes have violations of their codes. They have an anti-corruption code, for example, and then players are sanctioned under this code if the tournament organizer is a member of ESIC. And in those cases, when the player is not happy with the outcome of the disciplinary action, they can actually appeal, and then they might end up with me as a judge on the panel overseeing the case. So it's quite exciting, at least for me, because every time I'm involved in a case like this, I feel like, very loyally again, and also feel the responsibility. So yeah, it's quite exciting. I'm still quite tied to the legal community.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, at least first off, Anna, great to have you on the show, and we'll definitely set the premise as you talked about you're definitely on the judge panel or whatnot for the ESIC, but we're not going to get into like the nitty gritty and details of like going into this investigation. We want to make it clear that we're really just talking you and asking questions from a lawyer's perspective, and potentially educate more about match fixing. What's the definition of it, and educate us as players trying to grow into the scene too, that it's a no-no, but how is it a no-no, right? So first off, let's get into that and talk about that definition of that match fixing, right? And you mentioned you had to represent 2 players in the past. Was that specifically in CSGO, or was it in something else? But let's define what match fixing is here.
Yeah, so let's talk about match fixing first. Match fixing basically means that someone engages in conduct that corrupts either the outcome of a game, or then corrupts basically the betting process that's attached to the competitive process. So you have basically 2 parts. You have one, the corruption itself, where someone influences a game, its progress or outcome. I mean, of course, legal definitions can be super vast and long. I don't know if you guys want to, but I can even read to you the definition under the anti-corruption code with ESIC. I think it's quite interesting to hear, how deeply lawyers think about this. So just the corruption part is defined as follows. It says, fixing or contriving in any way or otherwise influencing improperly, or being a party to any agreement or effort to fix or contrive in any way or otherwise influence improperly the result, progress, conduct, or any other aspect of any match, including without limitation by deliberately underperforming therein. So just, I mean, I hope not everybody, fell asleep by now, but it's really, I'm just reading this to you so maybe our audience can understand how complicated this topic is. We really want to basically cover everything that is improper conduct. And again, depending on from what side you're looking at this, this can be a regulation from a tournament organizer, and I guess later on we can also speak about prosecution, basically proper public prosecution, and what's the public interest there. But coming back to the second part of your question, I'm already talking too much. I'm a lawyer, sorry.
This is fine. It's perfect. I love this.
So coming to the second part, yes. So my clients, they were all in CSGO. It was like the high profile match fixing in the early era of Counter-Strike. And that was particularly interesting because, of course, back then there was no regulation in place. And so representing those players was a bit less straightforward, I would say, as it would be today.
And just to tie into what you were saying about the definition of corruption, we talked about how it's engaging the conversation, or even anything that shows underperformance for a team that could literally throw a match. But does it have to have a reward tied into it to that sense? Like, for example, right now there's match fixing and there's betting with, for example, cryptocurrency, or back then it was with CSGO skins,
right?
Exactly, with skins. If there's no form of payment in there, like if there was no betting whatsoever, would this still be like a big issue still? I mean, I guess so, because you're talking about integrity of the game.
Why else would you throw?
I mean, at least under the ESIC conduct, it would be because the integrity of the game itself is protected. That's basically the goal you pursue. If we're talking from law and order perspective, what's prosecuted under most laws, you would look for a monetary damage. So you could qualify this as committing fraud. Usually, and this can be anything, right? This can be prize money. So it's the corruption act itself, and then somebody is basically defrauded of prize money. But this can be also the betting part. And when we're talking about monetary value, this can be also, of course, skins. This can be crypto, whatever.
So I guess it's still important for the audience to know that, if you're not match fixing or betting, but for the integrity from E6 code of conduct, is that even if you don't get payment or whatnot for match fixing, you're still going to be not in trouble probably from a federal court perspective or whatnot, but could still be in trouble from the code of conduct with ESIC, at least in the CSGO scene for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You should always play to the best of your ability. I think most rules and regulations, honestly, that are being out there by publishers, tournament organizers, ask that of any team or player participating in the games. And that's what's expected. That's also what the audience, what the fans expect, right? We want to see a fair game.
Good games, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You want Uber to scream all the fucking time. You want Uber to shout, literally.
Yeah. I guess because it's such a complicated and nuanced topic, and there's so much going on, obviously it's a big talking factor with the investigation and stuff. For you personally, what do you think is like the biggest like misunderstanding or misconception that you hear that you almost want to set straight? Because there is so much going on, and there's a lot of like hearsay through the grapevine kind of thing, that I feel that the facts can often get just ruined, I suppose, I guess, just because of that kind of how nuanced and complicated it can be.
Well, I think for me, the most important part is really that people understand that, one, there's a difference whether I commit a corruptive act just on behalf of the result or the progress of the game, and then when it's about the betting part and the money part. And that's the one thing. And the other thing is, I think where people get easily mixed up is whether we're discussing this topic through the legal lens, through the public prosecution lens. So this is where we basically apply the laws which are applicable in said territories. So with the recent scandal, we're talking about the US. So US laws are applicable. Or whether we are talking about sanctions under regulations from the publisher or tournament organizer. And this is, again, when we're talking about tournament organizer and publisher, this is very confusing to people. And honestly, I can't blame them, because it really usually requires a deep understanding of the ecosystem and who makes which rules and how are they actually applied. I will give you an example of that where it gets really confusing. Counter-Strike is the prime example. You have Valve as a publisher, pretty hands-off. especially in the early days, for example, there were not, like official rules or anything. Of course, you have terms of use when you, start playing the game. But for the competitive scene, you have nothing. Okay. And then you have rules from the tournament organizers. And what actually happened in the early days, when you had, well, some minor and some major cases of match fixing, where we're talking about a couple of skins. In some cases, we talk about maybe damage of, let's say, 50 USD or something. It's not much. In those cases, the players were, well, one could say, only subject to the regulations from the tournament organizers. However, once Valve got wind of it, for example, with Abba Power and Richard Lewis reporting on it, Valve blacklisted them in one announcement. And that was like without rules existing previous to that. And of course, when you look at that as just, a player or fan following the scene, it's pretty hard to understand actually who makes the rules, how are they applied, and how does, for example, Valve have the right, to do something like this, to ban players for life without even rules being in existence.
So, I mean, on that note, like, I'd love to know sort of your informed opinion on these sort of punishments, how they're handed out, outside of, the sort of legality and outside of quantifying damages incurred as a result of match fixing. But I'm interested a little bit more on sort of your take on how these publishers, as arbitrators of their own law inside their own ecosystems, make these decisions. Because obviously Brax, for example, was blanket banned from Counter-Strike and was allowed to compete in Valorant, right? This did not overlap. I guess first of all, I'd love to know your opinion on the severity, as someone who is involved in the ecosystem, your opinion on the severity of the ban from Valve's end, and also what you think about sort of Riot not upholding that and giving him an opportunity to still compete.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. So the first part touches upon how publishers generally apply the rules, and if it's a good thing that publishers not only make their own regulations, but they apply it at the same time, and there is no, third independent instance reviewing it. One of the big topics in that regard is that, of course, you can always make the point that usually these decisions are in the interest of the publisher in terms of protecting the integrity of the game, which is entirely fair. But in some cases, we have seen decisions by publishers that were disproportionate, I would say. I think you probably can't even debate that, especially in these early decisions where, there were only minor events and it led to lifelong bans. I think that's pretty unquestionable that's disproportionate. The game publisher, of course, wants to protect its game. You need the deterring effect on the players, on other players, looking at what can happen even if you slip up once in a minor way. So that's one topic where I'd say be aware. Game publishers have no mercy when it comes to these things.
Protecting the game.
Protecting the game, protecting the product. Totally understandable. It's their product.
Is there a precedent that you can apply from traditional sports, though, that sort of sets a framework for how severe these punishments could be? Like, is there a world where we can transcribe this to esports and inform publishers on maybe a less arbitrary way of enforcing these decisions?
This is such, oh my God, it's like great legal show here. I love it. So I'm a German lawyer, so I can only speak to basically the European context and European law. And we have lots of case law where basically the European Court of Justice in sports had to decide whether penalties in sports were proportionate or not. So now usually a penalty that prevents you for life, for example, in a first offense case, that's usually considered disproportionate, even if we're talking about something as severe as match fixing. So now the question is, can we apply these cases to esports? And I think we probably can if we consider esports similar to sports. So we just look at it as a competition. However, you can never disregard the fact that we're talking about esports as a product that is being owned by the publisher. So there are rights attached here too that probably could also make a very strong point that all these rules should not be applicable because we're simply talking about a product and your rights to protect it. So it's a very interesting topic. I even know lawyers who are currently writing their PhD on exactly this topic. It's super cool. So, but it is quite uncertain and a gray area. So now I have gotten so excited that I forgot. Oh, the second part. That basically the question: what do I think about players moving games to escape their rulings? Well, that just shows another, I think, challenge of the esports ecosystem as a whole. We do not have these overarching rule sets. I think ESIC is already doing a great job, where many stakeholders across games can be members, but of course they still need to convince everybody to come on board. So this can be one solution, but many publishers are not part of it. So I think on the one hand, it's a bad thing that, you do not have this overarching body. On the other hand, looking at some rulings and looking at, how should I put that, how disproportionate I find some of these rulings, it might be better for the publishers to just keep it separate. I find that this entire field is still severely under-evolved, honestly, underdeveloped. Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question there is that if we have or have had disproportionate punishments in the past, from your perspective, what would a proportionate punishment be? Like, I think people look at it and go, oh, X player match fixed, he's going to jail. Like, there's a lot of people that aren't quite sure the context of what these punishments would be. So, generally speaking, like, what kind of lines are people expecting?
Yeah, I think a good example is what actually happened to the iBuyPower guys and another guy called Joey Schlosser, in the early days. ESL unbanned them after 2 years on the recommendation of ESIC, because that case was basically then reconsidered. ESL, they're a German company, and you can say many things about ESL, but they also want to comply with the laws. And that was definitely the consideration there, that they wanted to find a proportionate result. Now, well, I found that it was proportionate to unban them after 2 years. It really didn't help the players much because, as you know, they were still blacklisted from majors. So they couldn't play. Yeah. And it was basically still the end of their career. And honestly, the problem, at least in the Counter-Strike universe, continues because now we have these new cases, and this is not particular match fixing. This is more about the spectator bug and coaches exploiting the spectator bug. So in that context, ESIC had developed a point system, how often and how severely this was, how many offenses there were. And depending on how many points you got, you basically got an according penalty. Now, what Valve did is, instead of adopting the penalty, they simply took the points and they said, if you have that many points, maybe then you're banned for life, which is, of course, again, like, this is a facepalm on my side, okay? Because this is just, this does not make any sense. And again, as Good says in the chat, it's the Wild Wild West. Yeah.
Just to give context, actually, to chat about the spectator bug, right, in CSGO. So basically what happens is that, we have coach slots in CSGO, which unfortunately we don't have yet for Valorant, but it's going to be coming soon, chat. Don't worry about it. But basically there was a certain bug where it would allow for the coach to be in free float mode at a certain position in a spawner, for example, right? So you could kind of tell if they're trying to want to abuse it, they're going to say, hey, there's actually one guy heading towards this way because technically, I guess they're not really monitoring the conversation in, for example, TeamSpeak or whatnot between the coaches and the players, right? For these online games. So then the coach could really say, hey, they're rotating back towards the B side. If they're actually coming back through spawn, you see one towards mid. So it breaks the integrity of the sport that way. So that's the or a gist of what the coaching bug was. And a lot of coaches got caught doing that. There was a whole
basically
list
a
of it
cipher
before.
cam, wasn't it? Really,
literally, that's how the meme of the cipher cam came out, basically for Valorant, and it was a huge list about that. So thanks for the clarification for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just add that, because it's quite
Yep.
a fascinating topic. When
Mhm.
looking into these cases, of course, you have, these obvious cases where you basically could tell, oh yeah, the position where the coach was, that he could really oversee the game. But you would also have these instances where they had the bug, but maybe they were facing a wall or they couldn't see anything, right? And but that would still, trigger some of these points that were then, rewarded, because the obligation under the regulation is that you're basically reporting it immediately to the guy overseeing the game, right? So this is why it's so unfortunate what's happening here. Yeah. Anyway.
No, for sure. And just to get back on what you were saying here, Anna, about like how disproportionate things are, and looking at the severity of some of these cases, and where it's like petty skins for $50 up to X amount. Now we're looking at the topic where, to get back towards not North America, but in the CSGO world, the FBI is currently being involved in the investigation. So are you able to tell us how severe this is right now that we have?
Why? Why
Exactly.
has it gotten to that point? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why this is so severe is obviously because we are talking about betting fraud, potentially on a big scale. This is a big deal. Betting fraud in general, it's always something really bad attached to wherever you are going to have competitive games. Doesn't matter whether it's esports or sports. So this is really why it's a big deal. And then, of course, I'm not sure what the exact penalty is under the codes applicable in the US, but I mean, I've scanned through a couple of laws in preparation to this show, and so usually the penalty for something like betting fraud can be up to 10 years imprisonment. So it is considered a severe violation of public interests to commit that. It's a big deal, and I think we're just at the beginning of that in esports. I guess it probably has already happened for all the time esports has been around. Just because betting was available, monetary gain was available over the past years. But that's all the reason why it's so important that we have good regulations, good bodies that can actually prosecute that, and that it's not only the FBI, but that we as the stakeholders protect the integrity of our games.
Okay.
Is it the severity of the offense that potentially has been caused that has triggered the FBI's involvement? Because obviously they're not arbitrarily going to delve into this situation themselves unless presumably the transgression is quite severe. Yes.
Usually, it depends. I think when we're talking about crime in most countries, you have crimes that will be prosecuted just because there is a public interest in its prosecution itself. That's usually the case by anything where you have damage in terms of a monetary value. So the moment they have a suspicion that there could be criminal activity, they have the obligation to investigate.
Okay.
Yeah. And yes, the suspicion would be here that there is some monetary value involved of relevance.
Sufficient proportion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess it comes down to also again since we are really into the Valorant scene, and there's potential that what's happening with ESIC and the FBI in North America might bleed into the scene for whatever rumors are happening here in the Valorant scene. If it doesn't get to the severity of going to jail, what's like the biggest fear that these players might have to look out for if they were caught doing what they were doing in CS with the ongoing investigation?
I think from a publishers and tournament organizers side, it's definitely a lifelong ban. It seems, there is a pretty firm stance there. And then, of course, from a prosecution side, it can be anything between, a monetary penalty to a very long imprisonment. Generally, also, the damage to your reputation is immense, and we are seeing this with players, who are being prosecuted or who have received a penalty in the past. They are really damaged goods, and it's very tough for them to ever find again a job. It's very, very tough. Hence, it's so important that we really think about this. Not only from a penalty perspective, but really what we can do in the scene to prevent this. I think, looking at sports, I think in some sports they're light years ahead when it comes to betting fraud prevention. There needs to be a lot of education. This type of crime is very complex, but it's also very easy for people who are organized, because you have very young individuals who are easily impressible in an esports context, who you can easily make dependent on your opinion. I believe you can really easily take influence on them, and I don't see, since esports is not as organized as traditional sports, you don't have these seminars for players who are maybe 13, 14, 15, in which you get explained, hey, whenever someone approaches you and maybe first they want to support you, but later on they ask for something in return, for example, throwing a match or just not playing to your best efforts, that this is really not okay, and that they have someone to reach out to. It's like we really don't have this infrastructure in place in most games, I believe.
It's a good time to put the Twitch ads to start talking about like esports integrity and match fixing scandals instead of like Captain Morgan's ads that I'm getting from McDonald's instead. Would be a good.
They're tailored to you, by the way. Just because you eat like
McDonald's.
I
haven't been to McDonald's in forever. But I guess
look, you've been clean eating for like 3 days, bro. I don't want to hear it. Okay.
Well, I'm doing keto. It's like it's not allowed for me. So.
Oh, I know what you mean. I've done keto before as well.
Now, we have also heard recently that Riot are conducting their own investigations into this as well. What is the purpose of this? Is this performative? Are Riot trying to indemnify themselves? Are they trying to shed liability? What is the purpose of Riot launching their own independent investigation into these allegations or against CS:GO players that are transitioned into Valorant? What does this achieve?
I think it's really, and I'm saying this without any insider knowledge, really.
Sure.
But so I think this is really, on the one hand, to protect themselves, but it's also, I believe, to find a good footing and a good approach with regards to that topic. Honestly, like in no other game you will have seen, I believe, a publisher making a statement like this, where they say like, oh, okay, this is actually a topic. People are transitioning, but they might be morally too corrupt to participate in our game. We don't want them in our game because they clearly displayed behavior in the past that make them not worthy, or they propose a risk to our ecosystem. So I actually think it's great that they're doing that. Riot, I think they pride themselves to be at the forefront of having good regulations. I can only say that from a lawyer's perspective. When I started out in esports, representing League of Legends players. We had rule books for the LEC and the LCS that were like 10 pages. We're now at 140 pages. Okay, like this is how much we have evolved over the past 7 years. And I think this is just a new regulatory challenge for Riot, and they're ready to take it on. And I think I think investigating and finding a good, good grounds for a decision is one thing, but I think Valorant, very much like, other shooters, are just destined for betting fraud, honestly. And I think Riot is probably setting themselves up to really challenge this, to really approach this comprehensively.
Yeah. But with that though, with because the biggest tagline is, "Oh shit, people see the FBI and they're already scared," and FBI, you're already linking to North America. Is it getting potentially could get bigger than that, where now you want to involve like Interpol or whatever, because the match fixing could be happening very, very much globally. So does EU have a free pass at this point, and they can watch it from like, "Oh shit, don't do it again," or is there something they should be worried about too?
Yeah, well, match fixing happens around the globe. There is really no limitation to that, and I would probably think that these networks usually span around the globe, that you don't only target one small territory when you're looking at committing betting fraud. It's really like that. And then on the other hand, just so you know, ESIC and others, publishers probably as well, are also, prepared for this type of war on the prevention and detection side. This is why publishers and tournament organizers team up with companies like Sports Radar, where you basically, you don't do anything else but monitor the data in connection to matches, and you can usually pretty easily see if something unusual is going on in the betting behavior with regards to a game. And that's, of course, less complicated, I think, from an investigative point than, proving that a player played a bad match. However, I would say probably experts, and I'm for certain not an expert in Counter-Strike or Valorant, but usually people can tell you, it's like, what, like, when there is an unusual match, like what the fuck is going on? Why is someone running around like an idiot on the map? So yeah.
Because there are Canadians involved in that too, right? So that's why I wanted to ask that question too. So it's or not. I'm not saying the Canadians are involved, but rumored to be involved in it as well, as we're still waiting for confirmation for that. So small fears there, right?
Yeah, it's probably a cross-border problem, and honestly, I think the better the investigation is now, and the more transparent the outcome, the better we will be able to tackle this in the future. Because otherwise, you will always have the fear that this is like a Damocles sword over the integrity of our game, and that really sucks, honestly, because that's a threat to our entire ecosystem.
Of course.
But I wanted to add something else to the education, because I think it's quite interesting, what also the chat says, and that players snooze through the education, and I think that's probably only true to a certain extent. I know that ESIC has this educational program they do with teams that are, for example, participating in ESL tournaments. So there will be an education where about, the negative consequences. And back in the day when I represented Joey Schlosser, there was actually a case where it's about $100 damage. We were trying to go route that was all about, redemption as well. You know, he offered a couple of things to Valve, of course, you know, without any success, but you know, he wanted to, but he also wanted to participate in the education, and I thought that was a very bold move. So he actually agreed to do a comprehensive interview to tell other players what it actually did to his career and how it really destroyed any aspiration he could ever have. And honestly, I think this video is still online on YouTube. It's heart-wrenching when you watch it. It's like, I think if I was, you know, a competitive player, I'd be like, holy shit, you know, I better watch out and, you know, be careful not doing that. It's not worth it.
I think it'll be important for actually, if we could find that video, Anna. So if you could find it, link it to us, so we could probably tweet it out on Valoranting's Twitter and all of ours. I at least I will, because if ESIC is currently running these things, I can post it here
in the chat, all right? Or is it allowed to post links?
Yeah, you can. You could do it on the chat.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe the Twitch chat, I'm not sure, but yeah, I think in general it's just because, you know, if E6 is running these things with ESL, for example, right? I think it's a great step, and I think at that point your players are like, they're like, oh crap, I made it, but there's still like such a huge pool of players that are still trying to make it pro, that they want to go by all means necessary sometimes to make it, and when they don't make it, they're trying to find other means to make money, which is why we're having these issues of match fixing, for example, and these scandals that may happen. So I think it's important for us to take that video or also what ESIC is currently doing with educating the population through the amateur scene and not only the pro scene.
Yeah, I think the amateur scene, you're touching such an important point, right? Because I think most of us are usually involved only at the very top. It's the top pro scene, and that is usually the scene where you will not find as much corruption. Why? Because, you know, players are making more money. They are very publicly, you know, visible. So they're already, you know, big. So it's really the risk of damaging, you know, a career you've already built is immense. Whereas in the amateur scene, I think what many kids will think is just like, hey, this is just, you know, maybe we play like, I don't know, 10th division ESL something.
Meisterschaft. That's where it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Who cares? But the thing is, no matter whether you play 10th division, you know, Meisterschaft or the League of Legends World Championship, the damage to the integrity is always the same. So we really have to fight on every level that this doesn't happen. But again, it's like we're just at the very beginning of this. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed. While it is still the Wild Wild West, I'm impressed by people like, you know, Ian Smith, who is the commissioner of ESIC, who founded the organization very early on and who understood that need, and, you know, stakeholders who are members in there, but also some other publishers who are now working, for example, with Sports Radar, that overall the industry does understand that this, you know, is a huge threat and we have to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that, Anna, as well. Those that are interested, obviously, at Bristol Lawyer is Ian Smith, and it's one of the places you can sort of follow the doings of ESIC as well. Anna, thank you so much for your time. I think this has been really enlightening, and obviously, it's such a multifaceted topic. We've attacked it from so many different angles. For those that are, you know, are interested in sort of in your work in the space or in your involvement with ESIC, where can people sort of follow you, or alternatively, or additionally, go to sort of keep updated in what's going on with this current case as it develops?
All right. So, I mean, first you can follow me on Twitter. I'm kind of, you know, hurt to see that everybody here has, you know, his Twitter handle, and I have my title.
Twitter handle?
Why is it not at Anna Baumann? Like, this is, you know, guys, what's going on here with production? course. So I
I'm typing it in chat.
Thank you. I tweet quite a bit at Anna Baumann. And then, of course, when it's about following generally integrity matters and what's going on with ESIG, yes, you should follow at Bristol Lawyer. That's Ian Smith. You can also follow ESIG. I'm not sure what their handle is, but that's really where you get all the updates with the ongoing
ESIG _official. Correct. Is
yes.
their handle.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's what I can really recommend. But then, of course, you have lots of great esports publications who report on this. And last but not least, your great show. I was very happy to be part of.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I speak for all of us when we're very pleased to have a chance to speak to you about this and get some of your insights. Anna, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. And yeah, maybe we catch up somewhere down the line. Maybe Boogaloo opens their doors once again. But
well,
yeah,
we'd love to. Ciao, guys.
Thanks, Anna. Anna, it was an honor. Get it, guys? It was an honor.
Okay. You know what? Just get out. Why do we go from such a highbrow conversation to the Van City hijinks? Okay, so shake it out a little bit, because obviously that's a fairly complex topic, and hopefully, those of you that watched it sort of got something out of that. I definitely did as well, because I'm understanding there's a dichotomy between how games publishers institute their sort of disciplinary system, and then the law. And the law definitely gets involved when the damages start to climb and we actually have sort of betting fraud, right? So something to be aware of. Esports is only going to grow, and these issues, the sooner that organizations like ESIC are able to lay a groundwork for this, the more chance there is that the integrity of esports can be protected as it surely continues to grow. Gentlemen, let's move on, because I mean, this next topic is a banger. You ever seen someone try and talk about something they have no idea about? I mean, if you've listened to me, you're probably familiar with it. Let's talk about VCT EU so far. All right, you ready for this? So here's what we have to go on. We're going to it's going to be Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the kitchen. We're going to Cluedo this shit. We're going to put it together from just this fucking picture. Ryan, run us through what we know about that VCT EU so far.
Yeah, so because this is the first part of challenges going into stage 2, everybody starts afresh. Nobody gets a bit of a head start. So everybody has to work through the qualifiers. This is the first portion of it, with both Team Vitality and Ascend qualifying. And Team Vitality, as you'll notice, beating G2 Esports. As we mentioned, with no streams, we have no real context on what has been going wrong for G2. So Price knows what the problem is there. The only game we got to see was Ascend versus Giants, which was nice of Pipson to stream from his perspective. Shouldn't have to do that, but we've spoken about that already. These sort of games that we've seen from FPX and Ninjas in Pajamas are seeding, but these are the top 8 teams, and 2 of them have managed to make their way up as this podcast has been going on. First of all, to sort of go over the Ninjas in Pajamas versus Ascend game, he actually won it. But yeah, the FPX Ninjas in Pajamas game was the 17-19 scoreline on Haven that I know Dream was losing his mind at, because we never got to see Sandgren bowl. Because for those that don't know, there's 2 brothers. There's Emil, who's the coach for Ninjas in Pajamas, and Doombros Eric, who is the analyst for FPX. So when these 2 face off, you have literal twin brothers playing up against each other. We've not seen that so far, and we are continuing to not see it because that game wasn't streamed. That was just for seeding. Ninjas in Pajamas beat Alliance a couple of hours ago, and Guild beat Alliance 2-0. Sorry, Ninjas in Pajamas beat Ascend.
Yeah. What the
so
fuck?
the winners of Masters 1 are out and have to play again for stage 2, much like Sentinels and FaZe for NA. Yeah,
it's happening again after Tanzik sort of tweeted like, 7 out of 8 Masters teams got through so far. Haha, it shows it's not a fluke. LBJ's in the chat telling us to fucking keep up. Excuse me. So we've been doing a podcast while these fucking games have been going on. What do you want me to do? I can refresh the spike.gg as well, bro, okay? That doesn't make me a fucking expert on the subject matter.
I'll send you a PDF of the notes that I was writing whilst we went into this podcast. I did have it on the other monitor as well.
The things that we have to do to fucking keep up with this scene. Hey, can we bring up the bracket again? Just that, I think it was Wikipedia bracket. Let's bring it up. I want to do something. All right, Van Silly, great to have you here as we cover now the VCT EU qualifiers. Fun plus Phoenix up against Team Stampy earlier on, but keep an eye on the other side of the bracket, Van City, because Volvo Peak are looking dangerous.
Teams are losing!
I mean, Volvo Pink lost to Fun Plus Phoenix. Look, they made it through that next round, but on the other side, Ninjas in Pajamas take down London United. They have a fated encounter with Wave Esports again in that next match, but I can't believe it, fans. NIP 2-0 over Wave Esports. This is ridiculous.
That's amazing. I just have to figure out what's going to be happening towards the conversation for Wave Esports at that point. But even if we don't have the scoreline of these two matches, we could still say that Ninjas in Pajamas comfortably made it into the playoffs.
That's a great point, Vance. I'm really glad that you pointed out how they move through. They go up against Fun Plus Phoenix. It is close, but they don't quite win the series. It's 2-1. Would have been an incredible game to see. Fun Plus Phoenix come outside with the higher seed, but NIP still get a qualify and go forward. Elsewhere, though, it's all happening. Alliance go up against Taron Mill, comfortably get rid of them, and they have a matchup against Fnatic.
Oh, I can't follow up on that.
Fuck
And
me,
you've now done more Europe casting than I have. Just off that
there you go.
alone.
I have now done more VCT EU casting than Riot Central. Unfucking lucky. So we got that B-roll from Vodafone Giants. You're keeping us up to date, Ryan, as you've had to watch two things at once here and take notes.
I'll do a cosplay of Europe VCT so far. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh.
G2 have gone. What is this? What's happened?
Liquid's gone.
Oh bless him. I'm never getting hired now. I'm out for the year.
Okay. So yeah, obviously, we had NIP versus a set. NIP winning that game is quite crazy. Actually, we'll get to go back and watch it. So that'll be great because there actually is something that exists there. Here's something I wanted to talk about really quickly. We partnered up with the Spike.gg here in a segment where I just want to spend some time talking about G2, or at least what we know about G2, right? Because this is a graphic that they've produced for us here, which shows its Ignition series, right? Going all the way back, it was like Level Clash 2, so ages ago, and VCTEU Stage 2. This is how their stats differed, or didn't rather differ, in between those two events. And yet G2 are falling out against Vitality and not qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happened in between, but it does show that when it comes to individual performances, at least, the problem isn't really to do with anybody on G2. I think the common misconception is when David P was on the roster, G2 would get good. When Zig came in, G2 were bad. When Neil came in as a coach, G2 were bad. And I don't think this is really fair when you have some of the caliber of players that they have on the team. I know that Ardis' stats are on here, and he was considered one of the best players in the world. Obviously, it's very hard to gauge that when the world doesn't get to play each other, but he was one of the standout players in Europe that was pretty unknown from his Fish 1-2-3 days. Sure. And with his ADR, his KPI, it's pretty consistent. It's obviously a little bit lower, but I think there are a few reasons, to say the least. The first of which is when you're on top, you don't really need to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, basically. When it stopped working, I think that the past few months of 2020 really caught up to G2. And I think it's pretty evident with what's been going wrong. Like Mixwell has even been performing better than he did in the Ignition series of Level Clash, which was the last Ignition event before the Blast Invitational, I think it was. Yeah. So, 6 months ago, and Mixwell has become a much better player, honestly. He's played a lot more Raze recently as well. He's not just a typical Jet Opper, in a time where Jet and the Op has also been nerfed since. I think the problem with G2 mostly is the fact that this is a team that hasn't really been punished for a lot of the fundamental errors that they made. I know that it was an ongoing joke with the last host Moses that Europe was just G2, really, and no other team really compared to them in regards to their firepower. It wasn't really true. FPX did, continue to crap the bed, to be honest, let's be fair. But I think that as we saw Heretics come into the fold and all of the other teams improve beyond, G2 now need to go, all right, we're losing now. What do we need to focus on? And then the answer, everything comes up. And they don't really know where to put their resources. They've got a new coach in that wants to sort of play a more fundamental level. But when things are going wrong, especially in scrims, you see, and I think this is the problem with TSM as well on a similar note, you see teams change up pretty much every week. And I think that's what we saw with G2 a lot in the first stage. We saw them pull out Sky. And typically when you see these kind of random compositions come up that you've never seen them play before, it typically means, and this is from speaking to coaches, it typically means that scrims maybe aren't going well, that they're kind of throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks, right? And I think that's what G2 have been trying to do. Find their identity, find out how they can realistically use these players to the best of their abilities. Because when things were going well, it was very easy to work with that team. Everybody was probably having a great time in comms and really just playing the game that they want to play. Now that they've been found out, they need to work out what's best for them. And that is going to take a lot longer now because of the amount of time that they went unpunished in 2020. I think some other teams kind of go, all right, we lost. We need to change up stuff. We need to focus on fundamentals, like NiP losing to Ascend. They came back a much stronger team and managed to beat Ascend in a best of 3 today. G2, they have months and months of work to go across, and it's G2, so expectations are always going to be pretty high. That's the YouTube video if I was to do one on what's going wrong with G2.
Yeah, don't ruin your content, you know what I mean? Because you sure as hell know Riot ain't paying you anytime soon. Let's again, I think like it was brought up in chat, and I think it makes sense because one thing that struck me about the Spike.gg's comparison is that overall the stats really didn't get worse. You know what I mean? They really didn't look much worse at all. Kills per round, deaths per round, stuff like a lot of this. You could argue that it's sort of superficial. You can see like in fact it actually got better, right? G2 are dying less, they're getting more kills per round on average. It's actually an improvement for them, and yet here we are. So that is a testament to the rest of the European scene rising up. And again, I think there's a lot of potential there. The ceiling is incredibly high for that scene. We have some really quality teams there. It's always a little bit disconcerting to see teams like Defuse sort of get dropped for their roster, and sort of teams sort of dipping their toes in and out of the pool there. But the European scene has just got pretty unbounded potential, and now that we have a chance to, again, I'm looking forward to seeing these games. I've got to work though. I'm actually at work right now, so yeah, thanks LBJL. If I can catch up later, mate, cheeky bastard. Let's move along though now, because there is the other region across the pond, the maybe less maligned older sibling. VCTNA, obviously we did get to see a decent amount of the gameplay, a decent amount of streaming, even going back earlier on in the bracket here. So this is a pretty broad look at things. We had some real upsets. I think it's safe to say, or at least results that when it maybe Darker Plax is the only kind of person who would have expected any of these, and he would have given us a bullshit reason for it. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that anyone is necessarily expecting to see BBG get past Sentinels. XSET looks pretty comfortable over NRG in general. NVB Ghost, but it does go all the way. Noble is starting to emerge as a team that's been playing in so many of these opens. The other side of the bracket is even more interesting. V1 beat FaZe Clan. Finally, those two teams are back and forth. Immortals beat TSM, and by the way, not by a small margin. Cloud9 Blue finally finds some success, and 100 Thieves get lucky. But this team, Rice and Meatballs, I don't fucking Rice and Meatballs, they beat T1, but 2-0 by the way. That's the team with that's the Dignitas roster, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Michael Def, Rara, and Koala Noobs on there as well. So T1, that is wow. I'm sorry we didn't slot more time to talk about that, but let's start with this team, the 100 Thieves match here, because that was one way that we actually did get to see.
Yeah, I think just overall this was an easier run in bracket here for 100 Thieves as well. I mean, like Empire, I'm not sure. I think that was like the round of 16 matchup, right? So it was pretty one-sided for that one.
Lycus Empire, right?
Lycus Empire, yeah. I think, yeah. But the Rice and Meatball matchup, I mean, it got. I don't think it was necessarily lucky. The scoreline showed that they were pretty comfortable in their roles. What I did like for the fact, though, for 100 Thieves is that Nitro went back to an Omen, so then Ethan's going to be the one that's going to be playing more into a Sage. And that's what we talked about before, too, right? When Ethan first joins the roster, you want to put him on an agent that's a little bit easier to play because he was still in the middle of playing with EG and Counter-Strike. So to try to learn the agent, learn a play style, I think Omen was the easiest one. Now that you had a little bit of breathing room, he's coming in as a Sage, and they're looking pretty decent. Nothing else has changed on top of that. I mean, you have Phoenix that they've played instead, so they're going to balance it out between Phoenix or Raze, but they're still aiming for that one duelist composition that seems to be working out. The bigger test is going into the close qualifiers now. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about this? Like putting Ethan on a quote-unquote easier agent, right? Having obviously the smoker role getting picked back up by Nitro, maybe this was sort of always planned. I'm not really sure.
Yeah,
but,
it seems it.
Yeah. Can we have more confidence in this 100 Thieves roster now, as they've been just really sketchy? They've been sketchy as fuck, man.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think so. I think when you see them sort of go in a pretty comprehensive game against a dig team that is always considered tier 2 at least, that they could definitely make their way into the closed part of a qualifier. That was always the expectation from Dignitas. When everybody else seems to sort of fall in these games against surprise opponents, to see 100 Thieves almost dictate the state of play with the Sage is a really good sign. It's going to be tough. They've got Ambox as the first opponent that's obviously had a lot of changes as part of the sort of closed part of this event. But they've got Cloud9, Immortals on their side of the bracket. It's doable to win those 2 games to make sure that you're in for the finals event. It's really just a case of how they perform on the day. I think that was the thing with 100 Thieves when you sort of look at their performance in Masters overall. Was it completely convincing? No, but it wasn't always trash as well, considering they were playing with the solo duelist, which is a composition that they've not really played before. You know, from seeing this composition being played a lot in Europe, it's sort of, you see some of the teething pains, I suppose, of them playing with it, knowing how to really utilize the breach to take that space and to really respond to what the other team are doing, especially if they're running double duelist. You need to be a bit more proactive in trying to make sure that they don't just run over you. I think that this looks a lot better. I think the Sage pick is a nice one. It means that they don't need to deal with the clunkiness of a breach in some cases, and Ethan can play a bit more counter-striking, much like Lowell tries to do with Heretic. Slow things down, dictate the state of play, allow rotations for your team. I'm looking forward to seeing this more. Whether it's going to win and get to Reykjavik, I'm not sure, but I'm feeling much more confident about the way that this team is lined up now in comparison to before.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they represent that European style in NA right now, and they're sort of one of the only teams that are really doing that. I'm seeing teams going back to Jet Rayner, quite a few actually. We'll talk about them in just a moment. Moving on though, Envy take down Ghost Gaming. It goes all the way. It's a best of 3 series. We get to see Mummy on the Astra sort of to start with here, which is one of the few operator players that is picking up that particular agent, Vans.
That's crazy, actually. At first, when I was like, holy crap, man, how is he going to be able to do all of this, like managing stars and shooting and all that kind of stuff as an operator for the team? But I guess it kind of makes sense when you're already sending the stars at the beginning, because I'm looking at the playstyle. We've seen different playstyles of different Astras, actually, throughout these open bracket. Comparatively, if you're looking at Mummy, for example, versus We Did for Exit, We Did is more reactionary. He's going to place his stars like very last minute for them to try to go for an execute or try to condition your opponents on like.
There's no way Mummy could do that with an operator, right? To be so reactive.
So you're placing those at the beginning, and then it's like, well, I'm just going to post up an angle and try to get an op shot. If I miss, I can't shadow step away. I can't run away, but I could put a nebula up. I could put a gravity. Well, maybe not a gravity wall because that's going to suck them towards you. But you could put a concussing pulse that allows for you to escape. And he's been hitting those shots no matter what. So I think he's been pretty good in terms of playing that Astra for Envy. But at the same time, is it going to be more detrimental for Envy in the long run when you're trying to be a little bit more reactive, when you have an agent that could be more reactive, and when you have an agent that gets a lot of fakes as an Astra? You can't have that for an operator because you're going to need to go into Astral form quite often.
What do you think, Ryan? Do you think this NA Astra is a good showing so far?
I think it's pretty convincing. The only issue is kind of what you lose in the process by not playing Omen. I think it really depends on the team. Like, I wasn't paying too much attention to North America when it comes to the Astra play, but like, I watched Kriya obviously today, who is typically one of the most well-known Omen mains in the world for Ninjas in Pajamas. Didn't play Omen at all today. He played Astra and Viper, and when you have a player like Kriya who is super aggressive, when they play no duelist, he's typically the entry on this team because he's one of those kind of players, tries to do the 200 IQ Omen plays. You lose a lot of that aggression, and so I feel that for the most part, Kriya was inhibited on this role more than anything because you don't see that throw the flash down, teleport, go, go, go playstyle. It's a lot more restrained, a lot more conservative, which could certainly suit some control players, certainly IGLs that want to play it. But I am concerned that those players that typically would be a bit more aggressive with their playstyle lose out a lot on key utility that sets up the rest of the team by trying to work with this agent. A lot of European teams, as I know, really think that she's going to be like the future of the controller role. So obviously, a lot of people trying to get in that game time to get better at her. But I think there are going to be some teams that will do that and actually lose out more in the process because the Roman was a main instigator for a lot of the aggression that you'd see from their team.
So let's keep an eye on how Envy sort of go. This is also from the Spike.gg and gives us an example of actually, decent Astra pick rate here. So quite a few teams are adopting this.
Yeah, lots and lots of teams, or more and more teams are picking her up. That means there's going to be less Omen because there's even less Brimstone being picked up right now. So Astra does give a lot of openings for these strategies for these teams. And again, there's different ways of playing an Astra. You want to be that person that wants to set those up, condition your opponents. You could be the Astra that's going to be the lurker, as we see Cloud9 White use her in that sense on Haven. There's a lot to do with this agent, which changes a whole playstyle just from that agent. So you could have different types of playstyle from teams from one single character, which is really, really nice to see. The next 2 weeks is going to be pretty fun to watch how Astra develops.
I mean, there's so much to look forward to in NA Valorant right now. Like the team sort of mixing it up, and also Bucky meta sort of being dispensed with, and there's a ton of cool stuff. I mean, let's move on quickly because these first three we sort of want to gloss over, and then we're going to dive a little bit more into detail. Xset take out NRG, obviously New York NRG roster having recently made changes there. We were just saying before, this roster looks fucking disgusting on paper, absolutely fucked. Xset, though, are just such a well-oiled machine at this point. They really are the definition of a team that plays together.
Yeah, and for energy, for me, it's just, again, I think it's just because you have these new players in the roster right now, right? You haven't really tried anything new, haven't really tried to integrate Astra in there. It's just, hey, Tex, he's been highly regarded from the past. He's been highly regarded after he got picked up by Equinox. And he's been highly regarded by people like me, like the casters too, because he is a very good fragger. And now you bring another person as Android. Now that you could finally have potentially that Android and Tex into this team, kind of like what Android and Yacer used to be as like those two carrying duelists back then for Nbox. So I think now that you have star fragging power with energy as duelists, and you're going to have Som again, who's probably like one of the best smokers, as Uber mentions, then they're gonna get there. I just want them to stick a little bit longer with this roster so they could develop that.
Yeah, and look, I'm fine. This roster is so good that I'm willing to give it even more time, to gel, because it's kind of like almost like it feels like a superstar team in some senses, right? Like the uncrowned kings potentially of NA on this roster. So we want to see more from them. Let's crack on now to some of our more under the microscope parts here. We're running a little bit short on time, so we'll try and get through this fairly well. But
what? We're running short on time?
Believe it or not.
How does that happen?
Believe it or not. So Vansili, we saw BBG, a team that we were criticizing for being unable to bridge the gap between tier 2 and tier 1, like so many of their previous colleagues, their peers. They take down Sentinels 13-5, both maps.
It's pretty insane. I think we're gonna have a thought about it later on with Shazam. But when you look at this matchup here for Sentinels, and even Dream hopped onto my chat too when we were watching this game, and he was saying, or I actually wasn't watching this game. Dream came onto my chat. I was like, hey, how come it was like so one-sided for BBG and Sentinels? And Dream literally just told me it was just bad spacing and bad takes there from how Sentinels played it. And I've watched this first map after as a VOD, and there were some decisions that were very individualistic from time to time from Tens, for example, because you want him to kind of like explode and do whatever you want them to do for Sentinels in general. But overall, like BBG was just very much prepared. I mean, fuck, they brought in Poach, right? And Poach is a great in-game leader, and he's a person that studies a game. Even if he comes from fucking Fortnite, he's a guy that puts a lot of hours into this game and practices or is able to bring a lot of value into the team. So when you have players that are shooting shots the way BBG was with that layer of what Poach brings, those upsets could happen.
So can we run that Ascent B-roll again? Because it's something I really noticed in this map, and it seems like Sentinels struggled a little bit dealing with what BBG do. On defense, BBG actually, they stack 3 players usually on one of the sides. They stack 3 players on B, and then they push aggressively into B main and take a duel. And Sentinels weren't sure how to deal with that. It got to the point where Sentinels just did not want, look at this. Look how passive they're fucking playing.
Yep.
Look how passive they're playing. And look at all the utility that gets stacked on that side as well. So quite often it's like, it's Bjor and one other person on one of the sides, and Bjor just throws all the utility in the way. And then they triple stack another side, and they explode together with 3 at the start of a round, get that info, then back out. Sentinels really struggled with this, especially when Sentinels were trying to defend. BBG was so aggressive that Sentinels gave up map control. They just defaulted to playing for retake every round because BBG were always winning. Like a couple rounds, Tens was able to take duels in A main, right?
Yep.
He never got more than one kill, if that. The first 2 times Tens gets Blade Storm, he gets shut down in the round when he tries to go for early action in A main. At worst for BBG, they traded kills with Tens. So what Sentinel started doing is sitting in spawn and just getting ready for retake because BBG were too fast into these sites with their composition. They double smoke out the B site and they just rush in. But what happens is now with 3 or 4 Sentinels players sitting in spawn, they give complete map control. They give so much of the map away. And BBG got wise to it now. And they started prodding elsewhere. They started playing it slower. So Sentinels, to try and play retake, had to sit in their spawn or close to their spawn for so much of the round. And they just could not get a read on what BBG are doing. A couple times Sentinels tried a triple push sort of on elbow, catwalk on Ascent, but rarely did they come out on top. And it always happened on like eco rounds or like half buys. So BBG played this really fast-paced style, kind of reminiscent of what sort of old phase were doing. And Sentinels felt like, I looked like Sentinels were definitely being read. BBG made a couple, as a team, really good calls, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, like, Sentinels are a really good team on the defense when it comes to getting in the ahead of the opponent and trying to know what site they're looking to aim on. They can get a player over there, catch them on an off angle, just sort of predict or work out from tendencies where BBG would be going. But I think in this series, it was the other way around. It felt like not so much that BBG had completely read into Sentinels that it was a counter strat. I think that's been dismissive of the things that BBG did so well. Also, bear in mind that it's a very new team with the addition of Poach. I don't think they've been scrimming long. So I feel like it was just Sentinels couldn't get an understanding of what BBG were trying to do. Just moves like this, it's just completely not predicting or reacting to the case of somebody flanking around like Bjor there. It was just, I didn't spot which player it was, but the one that was right in the corner, there was no reaction because pressure was coming in from Will, who I think had a really good series. I think BBG, I've always said, were like no Penky in Europe, where you have players like CNID on the roster, players like Vac and stuff, where you kind of look at the individual players and go, this team probably should be doing a little bit better than what they're doing currently because they have so many good players. And I think Will has been the epitome of that, where in open qualifiers, he's always top fragging, doing a lot of work. But we get to a stream game tonight. I certainly remember that best of 3 against FaZe, where both teams really struggled. This was pre-Smeeg. Will just doesn't show up. This was the opposite. He actually had a good game, and so did Poach mechanically as well with that 4K. Like, this just looks like a new, fresh team that is capable of hitting the heights that they should realistically be hitting.
Also, Critical's able to more consistently put up these performances that we came to expect from him. I mean, there's a reason people thought he was cheating. The guy's kind of fucking nasty. Raka also looks pretty good in that jet role, but didn't take over games. I thought Raka looked very good on Ascent.
Need to, yeah.
Yeah, Raka was specifically taking advantage of all the map control that Sentinels was giving to him and getting in position with his ops. So
happy and sad about the results, man. I'm happy for BBG, but I'm also sad that they've done it without Rob Wizzy.
Yeah, I know. That's a tough one. Let's move on. Immortals TSM. Fuck me. Okay, so again, I think we'll bring up the clip later on. It definitely feels like these teams have had a little bit of time to read. I mean, Immortals had to compete, you know, sort of in and around Masters. So it's not like they were sitting back and watching what happened. Rossi, obviously, on the team right now because Nature is taking some time away, plays the Astra. I mean, both teams try to play Astra. I think Cutler's playing Astra here as well. This map here was extremely one-sided. Hey, it started the series 13-1. It was just not a good step to get out on, and TSM looked really, really average.
Rossi was fucking sick, man, that series, dude. He was so good, but overall, like, this matchup on Haven was, I don't know what was going on with TSM, man. Like, Immortals never let the pedal off the gas. Like, they were, like, every single round, somebody was peeking garage door. If they weren't peeking garage door, they were peeking B main. If they weren't peeking B main, they were peeking C. Like, they were pushing and getting first bloods against TSM every single time. And when TSM even tried to retaliate, like, when they had enough money to give Wardell an op, and he'd be like, okay, I'm going to try to push slowly down towards an angle and try to get a pick. Boom, he gets shot off against a Vandal. Like, he was actually losing fights too, not getting first blood as a jet operator. So he wasn't, I think TSM overall were like, just it took them too much time to try to wake up in that first game. Actually didn't even wake up at all. He got 13-1 at that point because Immortals just were so good. how they pushed confidently and won those fights.
Yeah, I mean, there's 7 rounds won for TSM over that series. I don't want to linger on it because I think we discussed the TSM situation pretty broadly. Wardell didn't have many rounds where he was able to use an operator, and the rounds that he did, he actually ended up just getting fisted but wasn't even by JC Stunny. JC Stunny didn't even have like a pop-off game on Jet, who, by the way, obviously, this is, Stunny's normally on the smokers here. So what a transition for JC Stunny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, so he obviously got to play the Astra on Bind there as well. So they were just, mixing the roles up. Yeah, Buckies were a thing, but I mean, that's not really an excuse. TSM just didn't look great.
I think it's what I said about G2 as well, right? Where I feel that TSM often try and reinvent themselves every single qualifier that we see. And you compare that to 100 Thieves have brought in Ethan. Obviously, they have to change up their comp quite dramatically, but they went for the path of least resistance, it felt, when it came to the composition and what they were playing. I feel like TSM go for multiple complicated changes with their roster to the point that you don't get any sense of consistency. And that's important because I think we saw it a lot in both the qualifiers for North America and Europe because of the addition of Astra and some of the roster changes. Utility usage on executes and retakes isn't as consistent. Sometimes the Astra utility doesn't quite line up, so retake kind of starts to fall apart because of that. Because obviously when you play with certain players on certain agents and in certain compositions, you have to build up that playbook of how you use that utility together, the plays and how you want to execute, retake, fake certain sites, all that kind of stuff. If TSM change their look every week and they now have a new play with Brax and they might add in Hayes to use the 6-person roster to their full advantage, how are you meant to get some consistency with how you use your utility and stuff? I just want to see this team look the same for a couple of tournaments and
not even good, just consistent.
Build up a playbook instead of going, well, the Sky pick with Cutler and Hazed on fucking, I don't know, Tracer at this point isn't working. Let's flip it around. Let's play Dead by Daylight at this point. How are you meant to see consistency in a roster improve if you change the narrative and change the playstyle every single time? It drives me insane.
Yeah, Cutler on Astra and Hayes on Arms Warrior again.
Yeah, exactly.
Back to his. Okay, so let's move on. V1 go up against FaZe. These two teams play off against each other a bunch. V1 have like this sick young talent on this team. Obviously, like guys like Zelsis, guys like Vanity. Okay, so this is pretty competitive series here. All told, I took a very close look at the first map in particular, but Icebox ended up being very, very close. FaZe Clan really give version 1 some trouble, but overall, V1 finally get a win. Penny drops 30 on Icebox.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I think overall though, when you were saying like on that previous matchup that Buckies aren't an excuse, Buckies were definitely an excuse for V1 to be able to win this series though versus FaZe, because there were a lot of rounds on Eco where they were just winning versus Buckies. And how were they winning versus Buckies actually, right? Because FaZe wasn't doing that schmeeing. They weren't being that flash and dash. Like they tried an Astra versus Basilisk to try to counter the poach that was being used on Basilisk's side. But overall in this series is like they were a little bit more confined, I guess, in terms of their aggression for FaZe.
Yeah, they're constrained. I think that's a really fair point. The thing is that okay, so you know how we cast as fans. I swear to God, we cast FaZe on Haven.
Or Haven.
On Icebox. But we talked a bunch about the Haven play because they used to always they go with this early aggression up A-Long, right? They control A-Long as defenders. Yeah.
Yep.
They use like Marved and Corey. Corey's playing Breach.
Yes.
On Haven, for example.
They put Zachary back on Cypher.
Yeah, and you know what FaZe are doing? FaZe Clan, the aggressive FaZe Clan. They are playing retake against a team with Buckies. You're trying to fucking retake. Why? You're trying to retake the A site against a team with Buckies, bro. What the fuck do you expect? What happened to FaZe pushing up on the extremities, getting early information and map control? Like, how hard is it? Is it because they changed Corey to Breach now that they can't use him in like sewers to help get control of A with Marv? Because that works so well for them. But they kept playing retake and they walked around corners into Buckies about 25 times.
I think overall that's the thing. Sorry, Ryan. I'm just gonna say one more thing real quick. So in 2 weeks, all this is gonna change, right? Because Bucky, or next week even, because Buckies are gonna be gone. So that's gonna be the other question. Things could be a lot more difficult for V1. But overall, when you're looking at all these teams, right, they're falling short. They're getting upset or whatnot. they're still trying for certain teams, new compositions, new agents, and sometimes you only have, again, Shazam's going to mention, but you only have 2 weeks to be able to practice that, coming fresh off a different tournament to come into here and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, where you got upset already now, maybe you go back to what you had before. That's exactly what Envy did from VCT1 to VCT2. And then when they put Caboose back on a Raze and they put Mummy back on an Omen, they made it into the Masters. They made it into the top 4. And I think that's just going to be like this right now for first challenges for me is always testing grounds for all of these teams to see if they're studying of the game or how they want to evolve their strats, if it works or not. They have to apply it somewhere.
That's the main thing, right? Like, I like credit to FaZe for not just going, well, if Smeg ain't broke, don't fix it, and just continuing to do that playstyle.
Yeah.
They tried to adapt, but it did feel like a regression almost, literally, because they went back to old compositions that they used to play before they really rose to the infamousy of where they are currently, right? I do think that they still have the potential. One of the stats I wanted to highlight is that nobody really had a per series. I think Baby Bay had the worst KD with like a -3 differential. Everybody else was pretty much equal with their kills and deaths. So nobody played terribly. Nobody was a letdown. Everybody played well. V1 just played terrifically. They have signs of like, I would probably say Gen G in how they play. It's just a really well-rounded, any play can pop off in any given moment, but they just play some fundamentally sound Valorant, and it works out key. But FaZe can still have that moment. It's basically like kicking a hornet's nest and then throwing it onto the A side. That's FaZe Clan on the execute, because they just go fucking everywhere. They're like, you see like Mav sort of running up through tree and garden, catching out on the flanks. If FaZe can get one kill and find an in on their attack onto the defense, that's it. That's GG, because the defenders can never keep a track on what these players are doing. So credit to version 1 for actually playing into FaZe, facing them aggressively on like B and A main on Ascent, and actually winning those duels against FaZe. Like V1 played tremendously well, and I don't think FaZe played bad at all. I think they just lost to a team that was on a really nice run of form for that day, especially.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another team finding some form finally. Cloud9 Blue. Look, what a great series, and what a great coming of age for this roster, who like we wondered how many changes would need to be made until they can actually get their act together. Apparently we might be there. 2-0. Icebox is close, but Ascent is not. It's really not close at all. Zeta looks very, very good. And obviously this is one of the sort of later rounds, I think, in that map. But Cloud9 Blue, I mean, this is exciting. So many people have been waiting for this team to start making that happen, and they're doing it without tens, no less.
I'm really happy to see where Cloud9 Blue was heading before. And I think for a lot of people, when they were looking at Cloud9 Blue, it's like, okay, well, Tens is gone. They bring in Zeta. Is Mitch going to be playing Jet finally? No, he's staying as a Killjoy. By the way, he's also IGLing for the team now. So there's been a lot of changes going on with Cloud9 Blue. I mean, Vice was still in there at some point too, right? They had to figure that out as well. So now that they're there, we always said, okay, they have a roster that could compete.
Now they have a 5-man roster.
Exactly, right? So is it going to be like a team that's going to be a top contender for a top 5 or top 3, or is it just going to be a team that could upset? I think they have a roster that could actually win at this point because they have their structure in point.
Looks like they've settled into Leaf as the duelist here after trying him on every single fucking role under the sun, which is good. It's good. And Relics is now, on that Omen sort of full time.
Yeah. Like, that's the thing that I wanted to highlight, is just shout out to Relics and Mitch for, Relics at one point was one of the star duelists alongside Tens, right? And would have inconsistent results, but he would sometimes have a series where he blew up. I think having Mitch and Relics be the supporting players on the Sentinel and the Omen specifically really allows these new players to shine. And it doesn't feel like T1, where it's almost like echoes of a recent past where AZK and Brax were on the roster, right? This feels like a fresh team that doesn't have that tens factor looming over them anymore. That they've almost reinvented themselves and could sort of play without them and look like a consistent team. So shout out to Relics and Mitch that have been able to slot in nicely and let these new players that have come in shine.
And I thought that the interview that Zeta gave after the game was particularly illuminating. So we have it here for you to watch. I think you should watch it. It gives a good idea into how things have changed for C9 Blue for the better.
For first of all, after Vice left the team, we needed to restructure our thing a lot. and then I think like we made like a restructure already, and then also we trying now, and then our like coaching staff and like which is a new IGL Mitch is really doing well on the calls. So I think we've been really working really hard also, and then it's like working now.
Back it up. Back it up.
That
Hit you with the
song
808.
got me a copyright strike on YouTube when I was doing a co-stream, so I will never forgive Nerd Street Gamers for that. Christ.
Now, is that both of the? Yeah. I don't know if we showed the other part of that one as well, but he also, I think Zeta also talks about how his role changed to complement things. So I think we have that here. We can show that as well.
Basically, in like low ice thing, I was really like support player. Also, I was been like opping in CS time, and then that's why I've been trying lots of like jet things, also like a Soba bridge, like a sky thing. So also like for communication wise, like I'm not fluent at all. So the most important thing for me is like I need to try to help our teammates, but need to communicate. But I think Soba just like complement that like things. So
Not only support, man, the guy's fucking fragging too, man.
What the fuck? He speaks English better than I do. What do you mean not fluent, bro? That's actually astounding. Like that really impresses me, seeing these South Korean players being able to speak English. Like fucking multilingual people are so impressive. All right, so I mean that's really interesting to see what except for you, what Zeta's take is on just how he complements the rest of the team, and playing a wider. I feel like the Sova Breach Sky players have to really master quite a range of different agents in terms of how they play. So a lot of respect to him, and I think that's such a great example of maybe the first time that we've actually had a player plucked out of South Korea, invested in by his team, and now is really seeing some results.
Yeah,
I am very excited to see their close qualifier games.
Dude, I can't wait. I can't wait for that. But even then, I just want to give a quick shout out as well to Gen G, because even if they lost that series, what's changed in that lineup though is that they also had Kusta switching over to a Silva, right? And then you had, I think it was Michael that now goes into play to Sentinel. So they had that small role switch, and they even had a great attacker side play on Icebox with no Sage. And every time you play Icebox, or I'm watching it from my perspective, or where we're just plebs of Reddit and we're watching Icebox, we're like, we need a Sage in there. But they had some great attacker rounds by just using a simple smoke on the A site and continuously hitting that A site with their utilities. That worked out very well for Gen G. So I think Kusa looked very good on Asova too. I think he's going to be one of those players that's going to be very good at flexing for Gen G. And that means that agent pool, map pool, and even strat pool is going to continue to grow deeper with MCE right now as that coach.
So, nerds, get yourself excited for this weekend of games coming up. Let's have a look at the teams that are qualified for the closed qualifier. 100 Thieves, Xset, Envy, C9, Blue. That throws me off because the Blue's in white and Cloud9. Yeah, whatever. Immortals, Version 1, Built by Gamers, and Andbox. So real baptisms of fire for Version 1 and Built by Gamers now, as they really take their debut steps into Tier 1. I think this is incredibly healthy for the scene. And I guess I have the bracket here. We can sort of talk about that a little bit now, because the matchups are this. I'm just going to have to read it out to you guys. So 100 Thieves take on Andbox, which is going to be great. Cloud9 Blue take on Immortals. Xset take on Built by Gamers, and Envy will go up against Version 1. That is a tough ask for Version 1 especially, but if you can get through phase, there's no reason why you can't deal with Envy. It will be a very different feel, a very different kind of game style that will be required to take that win there. But I mean, all four of those, they're just fucking bangers. I don't know, man. This is what happens when you stream your games. I don't know what else to say. Like I cannot wait to sit back and enjoy this stuff. And obviously, guys, as you know, the European qualifiers are going right now, so that's where you should be heading after this. Go back and watch the VODs, or maybe you're multitasking. So good on you. Before we wrap things up, everyone's like, "Wow, NA Valorant so random, ha ha ha, so crazy, so silly."
That's so crazy.
Yeah, so crazy. Shazam gives some thoughts on sort of why they got upset, or maybe, and I think he gives some context to what Sentinels were experiencing going up against that BBG team and slacked them.
This is what I'm talking about. So you watch both these teams play so many matches in Masters, broadcasted so many matches, give it their all. Now, 2 weeks later, they have to jump in an open qualifier on the same patch. You can't completely reinvent yourself. And now these teams that have been sitting here watching Challengers 1, 2, and 3, watching Masters, have all the time, and now this is all they prepare for, and you can't prepare for these teams. That's why you have like the teams that earned. This is what I made the argument about open qualifiers, is the teams that earned in the big tournament a spot a little bit ahead. So they have a chance to also prepare for these teams in the open qualifier playing through, and now they can prepare. And the more matches you play, the more chances you have of losing. Obviously, you play a fuck ton of matches versus these good teams, these good players that are, you know, all being paid. It's their full-time job. They're preparing for these matches. It's not always easy. It's not, dude. Like, we not only did we have a bad day, but they had good reads on us. BBG's a good team, man. People are memeing the things that I said like the other day, but I still stand by it. Like, it's not, you can't just reinvent your whole team in a week, man.
So yeah, I mean, there you go. I think, you know, for teams that were able to sit and watch Sentinels on the same patch, I'm sure that gives them a degree of leg up. Like, there's only so much you can do if you just have to get out there and sort of, you know, because I tell you what, Sentinels sure as hell weren't watching fucking footage of BBG while they were playing Masters. That was not happening.
Prepping for it, yeah.
I look, this is fair. This is fine. Like,
I think
you can make excuses for losing, especially when you say like they just read us really well. That's fine. That you obviously didn't read them as well, and yeah, you probably didn't have as much tape on them. I'm cool with that. I'm okay with a world where this is actually a reasoning that a pro player gives for losing a game. Shazam, that this is cool with me.
I fully agree, man.
Yeah, like it sort of raises the question, I suppose, of, you know, should these teams that go pretty far in Masters get a bit of a leg up on the competition? And with results like we saw with Sentinels, FaZe, and Gen G, you could argue for either side, right? It's like, oh, these teams clearly deserve to have a bit more of an opportunity to surpass some of the other teams because they did well, because they can just be upset like this. But also the other argument is they could be upset by any other team. They shouldn't deserve any special treatment when BBG can come along and beat them. And there's an interview with Poach that Platchat did as well, where they're talking specifically about that. And like I said, this team has only been together a week with Poach, so they're still working out what they want to do. Never mind how they're going to try and counter-strat Sentinels and stuff. I think it's just the common stuff with Sentinels that goes around, right? That they can be read, that their playbook isn't the deepest. But yeah, it's always going to be a challenge when you have so many games in a row. The key thing is not much has changed between the Masters 1 patch and this one, other than Astra's in the game, which wasn't really an impact with the BBG game.
Yeah, and that's going to change too when Bucky's are gone and Viper's buffed and Yoru's buffed. But I think my other argument too as to why I agree for players that shouldn't get the special treatment if they went further into Masters is just for the simple fact that I cannot give them a leg up if we are giving everybody else the same opportunity to gain these circuit points to get to the champion stage. So if I'm going to be in a top 4, and I've mentioned this before on my own stream, like if I'm going to be top 4 and it's like I'm automatically to make it to close qualifiers, it's kind of unfair if it's going to be easier for me to make it to Masters and then qualify for these circuit points. It's like F1 right now. Like if I'm Lewis Hamilton, I'm winning every single race onto the grid, but next year I'm still going to have to count on my engineers to have like a good car and to be able to qualify through the time lapse to be able to get that first grid again into the first race. Everybody starts at that same spot. It's just whatever is given to you in terms of support gear, it allows you to move forward. So I think again for these teams, if they're Sentinels loses and they come back and they fucking wrecked every time anyways. That's why I'm not surprised. I'm not worried with Sentinels losing to BBG first, because now again it's their turn to have that 2 weeks to fucking practice, right? Or that extra week to like reinvent themselves while they're watching everybody else, and then boom.
This is a positive, man.
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
I think this is good for the scene. Even Sentinels aren't that fucking worried. So no fans need. Look, knee jerking is like, it's the thing that we do, right? We're on Reddit. We're speculating. It's allowed. You're allowed to do that, right? You're allowed to. It's about, you just have to admit that you're also objectively a moron if you do that, but you're allowed to do it. And we'll see what happens this weekend. And yeah, Sentinels will fight. You best believe they've been watching. They're finally get some damn time off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm quite sure they come back even stronger on a different patch. My God. Okay, what a show. I mean, we were approaching 3 hours as per usual. Insane stuff. Brian, man, thanks for coming on, dude. Always great to get some of your insights here on what's going on in Europe, or rather what isn't going on in Europe. But yeah, pleasure to have you, man.
I'm an expert. That's it. That's all I can offer. I'm an expert on the darkness. It fucking stares back. Yeah.
It is.
to be
I like
on.
Ryan's using color correction to make himself look a little bit more tan, but we know better. He's pasty. He's been sat in the darkness.
color means to hype, right? So that's pretty much
Oh, fuck
on brand.
you. Also, I want to thank Anna Baumann for coming on the show and helping us
Definitely.
to sort of make sense of what is a really complex and frankly quite serious topic. So, if y'all get a chance to go back, if you're watching this and maybe didn't see that section, it's probably my favorite part of the show. Really
Yeah.
valuable to get someone who is frankly overqualified to be on a fucking podcast like this, but we're really thankful to Anna for giving us that time and a chance to pick her brain as large and wrinkly as it is. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for now. We're going to be back next week, Tuesday, same time. Remember, we have a Twitter handle now. At Valoranting Show, soon to be at Valoranting once they sort it out. Of course, you're over here on Twitch. You can watch us twitch.tv/DNP. Give us some love in the YouTube comments below. Who do you think's going to win those matchups next week? In terms of challenges, do you think version 1 can handle Envy? I want to know about it in the comments section below. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next weekend. Keep loving the Valorant, and we'll see you on the other side of the close qualifier.